Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Today is the second symposium for the exhibition. So yesterday, for those who were here, we've had the opportunity to hear a number of people from different sectors, architects, educators, and as well as some of our PSP delegates, as well as the from institutions and so on. So today we are focusing on some exchange between our exhibitors as well as some friends that we've just met and some friends that we've known for a little while from the States. Again, to explore the idea of towards architecture and beyond. I mean, for the exhibition, the title of the exhibition, Beyond Territories, one of the sub-theme right at the end is to kind of ask ourselves the questions as an architect, what more can we do to think out of the box, to do things sort of slightly beyond what we know. Well, obviously architecture is a very broad word, but I think, that little bit more. So we want to encourage, and Anderson was very kind. I mean, in his speech yesterday, threw a couple of curveball. One of them was to ask you, what are your thoughts? So you've had, 10 hours, 12 hours to think about your version of Beyond Architecture. So at the end of each session, there are two sessions. In the first session, at the end, we have a discussion panel. We'll invite some of you who perhaps haven't had a chance to present your work or to come on stage to have a discussion with. The first one will be with Helen, and then the second session will be with Bernard to just share some of your thoughts on a kind of very casual basis. So you're not here to hear me speak, so I will start the proceedings. And today, the first session, we have Jin Liu from Soleil. Some of you may have know her work at K11. But it's much more than that, and I'm very excited that she's very busy and she's kind of a little bit last minute when we approach her as well. So come and join us, and I wouldn't keep you any longer. Please, can you come on stage and share with us your thoughts? Thank you.
Thank you for inviting, even though it's last minute. I'm very glad to be here to reconnect with a city that I'm very fond of and have been working there. Fortunately, had the chance to work there on several projects, from the small to the big. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the K11 after it's being used by the public. I've seen it after it's finished as a construction site, but not by the public. So hopefully one day very soon I will make it there. I saw the title of the Beyond Territory today. I kind of took it literally and really thought that I would share a little bit of how I personally have gone beyond the physical territories of a different time and different social and economical realities, and also kind of today, although our office is based in New York, we are practicing in many other countries and different economic and social conditions as well. And how did that attitude come about? Very quickly, I was born in 1980, and I was born in mainland in Nanjing, China. So at that time, I think Mao died in 1976, and Deng took over in 1978. So it was right after China just came out of the, I would say, the kind of the communist, really kind of traditional, more fundamental kind of communist era, and development didn't happen yet at that moment. So I remember kind of my childhood, the city was mainly predominantly small alleys, small street, very few cars, probably not even any cars, and no modern housing. And we live in a courtyard house, and we shared kitchens and bathrooms with 10 families, and going to bathhouse, communal, and shared a kind of public bathhouse with my aunties and mom, and just kind of growing up in that very communal and very kind of pre-modern period. And then in the 1990s, because Nanjing was the older capital, I think by design, the development came a little bit late compared to many other cities. And it was only in the 1990s that you start to see really the trees being cut down, and then asphalt streets kind of started to pave the entire city. And people started to abandon the bicycles and started to kind of get into the cars. I think actually maybe I'm missing one slide here. But then kind of fast forward, when the border opened, I left to Japan and studied there, and then went to England, and then ended up studying architecture in the US, in New Orleans, which was very eye-opening, because before New Orleans, I never came to the US before, so all my image of the US at that moment was from movies, and I didn't watch like David Lynch or Oliver Stone. I was watching like Pretty Women and Britney Spears, right? So my whole conception of what America was very glossy and very glitzy, and everything was perfect, and it was the kind of the pinnacle of the developed world. But then I arrived in New Orleans, and I realized that the reality is not exactly what the movie screen showed. There was a lot of poverties, and the concrete asphalt streets there had so many potholes, and all the modernist housing that I thought represented progress when I left China in the 90s, they were all crumbling. And I learned about Section 8, I learned about redlining when I was in New Orleans, and my thesis project was really kind of going to one of the dilapidated social housing project and understand displacement and racial kind of divide in the cities. The other map, actually supposed to be next to that map, shows, so this map shows the flood level in New Orleans, and the other map that was supposed to be on the right side of it shows the racial divide in New Orleans, and you can see actually they overlap almost 1-to-1. So in the areas where it's below sea level, it's also where predominantly black population lived in New Orleans. So that was a really big lesson for me, kind of at the end of the journey towards the developed world, and seeing kind of the internal problems of the so-called modernism and development. And so after kind of fast forwarding to New York, starting our own office, and as you know, architects have to operate within kind of the larger social economic realities, but still, we strive to be critical and reflective of that realities as well, from within. So when we started our office was in 2008, and that was when, if some of you still might recall, that was another moment where the stock market really fell beyond 20% within like a number of weeks. And I think the architecture profession probably lost 1/3 of the jobs, but we at that moment kind of renewed our vows to architecture and decided to start our own office. And one of the first projects we did was this PS1 Young Architects Program installation, and we called it pole dance. And it was really a more kind of playful approach to think about modernism, and think about the Cartesian grid, and think about this kind of overarching kind of social and economical and kind of development grid that is imposed, and by now it's permeating kind of every corner of the world, and how that Cartesian grid and never exists in its perfect kind of rational orders, that it's constantly a negotiation between the points, and it's elastic, and it has the propensity to also lead to failures, but still within that fragility and within that weakness, and there's resilience, and there's playfulness, and there's joy. So that was really kind of the genesis of how we started to really approach architecture as a new generation that grew up in the globalized world, and the integration of the global South and global North, and the meeting of the East and West. So since then, we've been kind of based in New York, but doing projects all over, as many different and diverse cultural and geographic and economic conditions as much as possible. And instead of kind of just dropping in and making our signature architecture in kind of stamped everywhere in the world, we really take this practice as a way of kind of understanding the specific conditions and the crafts and the histories of that place. So with this project, small and big, we work very much with the people who are making the things themselves. So, for example, this pavilions we made, one of the early days, we went to the factories and kind of really, water jet cut this stainless steel plate, flat packed it, stretched out in different areas, and kind of really invented this entire kind of stretching of a flat packed stainless steel plate with the people in the workshops. And then we also worked in similar fashion with people who are welding stainless steel rings, and kind of invented this facade for this project in Kuje Gallery in Seoul, Korea, in one of the most historical neighborhood, and really kind of made a craft that's very contemporary and very different from the craft that exists in that neighborhood, which is a couple hundreds of years old, but still, nevertheless, it's made out of hands, one piece at a time. So there's a democratization of the craft as well. And in this project we did in Chicago, we kind of made a portico around the accessible ramp in the convention center, and the portico is all made out of just conventional steel stud. But then kind of we really twisted, and every twist is not just hand twisted, so it's just twisted by kind of bending the material to its maximum flexibility, and creating complex geometry from that kind of elasticity inherent in the material itself. And in King 11, we made this facade that was really composed out of 400 bent glass tubes, and this is also a very thick and very heavy glass material that's kind of melted to this half pipe shape, and that takes a lot of heat and patience for a material that I would say like very hard to become soft to take on this shape. And we at the same time also are very much thinking about the relationship between the people who are making and the people who are living in our buildings. So for example, this is a project in Leon in Mexico, which is one of the fastest growing urban sites in the world. And we were asked by the city to really think about how do we densify the urban core instead of continue this urban sprawl that's been happening there for the last 20 years and creating a lot of environmental and social problems. And there's no trash pickups, there's no schools, there's no hospitals, there's no social services for any of the people who are living like 2 hours out of the city. So kind of densify the city core and urban core, and then really moving people back into the urban core where there are these social services. So we made this housing for 62 units for under $2 million. And the entire building is just a slab, post and slab, but all the facade is made out of this customized CMU block that can be made by the people literally kind of are living there as well. So these are housing for people who are making under $7,000 a year. And it's a prototype project that the city is adopting and rolling out kind of quite rapidly in the last few years. And as you can see, that it's building the housing at a much higher density than what the surrounding existing context is. And creating kind of its own economy around the housing themselves. And even at home, close at home in Brooklyn, we make projects for maybe sometimes a little bit more economically affluent clients. And for example, this is an art campus that we just finished in Bushwick in Brooklyn, but each of the buildings, so this is a campus of 4 buildings, but each of the buildings are made as much by hand and craft as possible. So I think we've gone to, even in New York, have gotten to know quite a few really interesting kind of craftsmen from different backgrounds. For example, Harry here, that we've been working on 4 projects with him. He's from Sikh background and has a very incredible crew of masons that we've been working with in the neighborhood. And this project, this other building that's in the same campus, for example, it's a cast-in-place concrete, but we intentionally kind of paying tribute to Lina Bobardi and made even opening that can only be made by hand, and it has this kind of irregular hand qualities in terms of its geometry in this volume and creating kind of an oasis inside the city. So that's my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jin. I think we look forward to you coming to Hong Kong to see the work that you've done. I somewhere along the line I saw, didn't they make a slide out of the glass tube? Yeah, if you haven't seen it, they use the glass tube to make a slide completely out of glass. So the steps you go up, it's glass, and the structure that supports it is glass. It's an amazing thing. If you haven't seen it, where is it now? Last time I heard it was in Barcelona. Still be in Barcelona. Oh, you can't see the real thing, but look it up. It is amazing structure. Well, I guess not, especially not if you have high heels or something like that. But have you gone on it? No. Oh, too bad. But anyway, thank you very much. Next speaker, we have Vivian. Vivian, one of our exhibitors, and if you go to the exhibition hall, you can't miss the exhibition right in front of you, bright lights, and it's she's been working on it for quite some time, and she was here for 2 days setting it up as well. So it's her baby, and I wouldn't take any away from her. So I'll ask Vivian to come up stage to give us a talk about her version of Beyond Territory through this experience of working with us. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So thank you for having me. It's been 10 years since I used to live in New York, so it's good to be back. So a little background about myself. So I was previously like a practicing architect. So that's after college I moved to New York, and I did mostly mixed use and commercial projects, small projects. And then with the economic downturn in 2008, I got laid off. And that was a time when I started thinking about to myself, what does architecture mean to me, and can I do something beyond that? I switched career. I went back to school and got a teaching degree. And through that, I think after teaching for a couple years, I started thinking to myself, I still have a design background and also education background. What more can I do? So I then went back to school and got into museum studies. So I think today, my focus will be talking about like exhibition design, and I hope that this touch on this topic. So Wunderkammer, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this term. It's a German term that means cabinets of curiosity. So basically it arose in the mid-16th century. And basically it forms the basis of museum display. And if you look to your left, you see that most architecture exhibition is somewhat designed in the same way. We're always displaying objects, our illustrations, rendering images almost as if we're designing exhibition in the 16th century. And for some reason, this hasn't changed. So when we were asked to design and work on an exhibition for architecture, we're really thinking about how to move away from the traditional display method. Architects are not, you must be familiar with this term, right? With Louis Sullivan, what he said, like form ever follows function, but with exhibition design, form always follows content. And this is what really drives exhibition design. So exhibition design is really like a practice for aesthetics. And most of the time we're communicating ideas using spatial design, textures, colors, typography. There are a lot of different basically elements that go into spatial design. And I think that really, having like architectural background really helped me to think about how human being or how visitor come into a space and get all these information. So a little bit about the Henderson, this project. So we look at the skyline and we always see great architecture pieces. Yesterday, Florence talked about there are former British, and also like a lot of American architects are basically forming the skylines of Hong Kong. And I think this is a very exciting time to see what Hong Kong has become over the past like 30 or 40 years. And if you look at some of the architecture buildings, a lot of the central district, they were built in the early, I would say that before the handover. So when you have another building that's going to be built in that prime location, is going to be a new landmark, a new icon. So what does it really represent? We think about like architecture as a symbol, right? It should represent a city. And I think it represents the city's development, culture, and spirit. And to me, that's what architecture means. So this is like one of the, I guess, like concept and also the driving for this building. And we start thinking about the content. So many of you ask, oh, why 4-cylinder? So this is a diagram that we actually presented to the clients, because when you look at the Henderson, it's not just average building. They really think about maybe how it connected to the site, its context. They're using a lot of new technologies into the buildings. They're also, one of the, I think, inspiration was that it's using the city's emblem flower, right, as the building form. So there's an aesthetic component to it, and also human like creativity. Why do they adopt instead of a central core for the office building, but they adopted the side core so that you can maximize the view of the whole Chater Garden. So this is like how we derive with the form. And this is what I mean by form follow content. So after we have design, art, science, and engineering, using very simple like diagram to illustrate this, we then have the content structure. Now, a lot of you will probably don't think that, you have all these labels that is written on like the cylinders. Maybe they're short, maybe they're like just one paragraph, but each cylinder basically has these content that tied into each topic. This actually is a challenge for us because I think that 15 years ago, Metropolitan Art Museum actually conducted a study for visitors. So most people, when they look at a piece of masterpiece artwork, they spend 27 seconds. And median is 19 seconds. So you come into the exhibition and you have all these amount of content you want to share with the visitor. Information overload. Like looking at this diagram, you really think, how am I going to communicate this with the visitor who might be architect or who might not be architect? So ultimately, what we adapt was that we have all the informational highlight at the top that gives you a somewhat like summary. And then you have all these different little elements all around the cylinder that talks about the model that you're seeing. And you have these drawers that you can kind of pull out as discovery, to see like what the end product is like. Initially, we account for perhaps there's some cultural elements that Hong Kong audience might be shy and they're not used to like pulling drawers, and especially during COVID time, like people do not want to touch too many things. But once I'm here in New York, I actually do also observe audience. Like, in case you don't know, I'm sometimes like behind the columns and looking at how people interact with the exhibits. I also don't see many visitors opening the drawers because they're not used to it. Nobody would imagine going to see an architecture exhibit and you're able to like pull out drawers, or because most of the time you're looking at all the illustration drawings, you're trying to understand the process. You don't really think that there's like some component that you're supposed to like pull out. So I think in a lot of ways when we design architecture or buildings, once a project is launched and constructed, it's almost as if an architect's job has stopped. But as an exhibit designer, when we look at our final product, there's always an evaluation. We think about how can we revamp or re-edit some of these like fine-tune like these elements, so that this is actually a great opportunity for me to like observe my work and also like think about how people interact with information. So how do I go to the next? Okay. So this is one of the example that I want to show. Like when we have our exhibit, we think about almost like a visitor path, right? So the most important ones, the information, because I see that a lot of people, when they come into the exhibit, they're always looking at the site model. And this is actually what we perceive and also expected, because those are the kind of final product, and it has more element for people to like talk about and look at. But then this is like how we actually break down the components to see how like our topics can tie in with like each cylinder. I know my presentation isn't very long, but I'll be grateful if any of you can come and let me know if our thinking when we design this exhibit, when it's being implemented, do they match, or did we actually achieve our goal? So this wraps up my presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. I can, as I was listening, I can just imagine you thinking about when we go back to Hong Kong for our exhibition, how you're going to change your drawers to get them more. I don't know. I mean, it was all interesting to see, because we've been to Hangzhou, then with Beijing, and then New York and Hong Kong. It would be interesting to see, whether there'll be any audienceship. The culture. Are there more people in, I don't know, Beijing are more curious, or people in Hong Kong are more curious or less curious? It'll be interesting to see that too. There's a cultural element to that. So thank you very much, Vivian. Our next speaker is also, a set of speakers, is also one of our exhibitors with a difference. I mean, they're not architects, which is great. They exhibit, it's their take. I mean, we have I'll let them introduce themselves, their respective kind of discipline to you. But I think it's interesting to have somebody to tell us what they think of architecture as well. And I mean, I'm particularly excited because they're going to Paul, Zoe, and CM is going to explain to us the process of how they make it and the idea behind it. So without further ado, please come up, and Paul, Zoe, and CM. Thank you.
Do we get the other mic working?
I like to use walk around and talk. So let me see if we can get one of these working.
We are told it should be casual,
Check. Oh, okay. So thank you, Roger, Bernard, and the rest of the team at Hong Kong Institute of Architects. We are Picture Rhythm Studios. Myself, Paul Shepard, Zoe Chan, LCM is with us here today. Are we good with our deck? Excellent. So hopefully you got a chance to see our installation, Street Scene Dreams. It showed obviously at our 3 locations so far. We have a full-scale version, a large version, 3 meters tall. And then here in New York, we have a smaller version. This is our team. Myself, working in animation, projection mapping, multimedia art installation, LCM designer, mostly for stagecraft, set design, costume design. We're also working with, obviously, Zoe over here, producer, curator, the person who's pushing us kind of to do all these things. This is actually her project. We don't talk about that much, but this is her project that she pushes us to do, right? So we need that energy. And then we're working also with a professor at City University of Hong Kong who works with machine learning and art involved with working with machine learning, robotics, etc. I also teach myself at Hong Kong Baptist University. I have to plug that in there. So, but we were approaching this. We obviously saw the call for works, and we said, how can we crack this? And an important aspect for me, right? Obviously, a Westerner from California. Used to live here in New York City, so it's great to be back. Obviously, there's been a lot of people throughout history from the West going to Hong Kong and other parts of the East and saying, I understand this, and I really wanted to make sure that I wasn't doing that, right? So a big aspect of what we were trying to do is with our approach was culture, right? Being open to all aspects of culture. So having an outsider who just moved to Hong Kong 2 years ago, right? My fresh eyes, as well as locals who have an equal voice within this process, who can talk about things from the local perspective, people who've seen Hong Kong their whole lives. And of course, our imagination, right? We're trying to push, how do we imagine things to be, what's within our hearts, what's within our emotions going forward, and then experience, making a unique experience for an audience to come in and see. Next slide. And something that's, to be honest, kind of haunted me, at least for a lot of my career. I've worked on a lot of projects that involve history, architecture. Even though I'm a filmmaker and artist myself, I use architecture a lot in some of my works. And I'm constantly, I used to read more books, and now, of course, I'm on Instagram a lot. But I'm constantly haunted by the changing of cities, and specifically the history that is there with things that used to be there. And also this poet, writer, and historian who's actually, he's talking about San Francisco here, my home city, a poetic relationship to the city was possible in part because the past, with all of its contradictions, conflicts, was embedded in the place. You could read traces of subjectivity in the stones and in the air. And what he's talking about here, at least for me, is there is obviously history, but there is kind of a memory to spaces. There is an emotion that's still there, even if you can't tell exactly what it is, but you know, it's rare that you have a completely clean slate to construct a new building, structure, architecture, etc. Oftentimes there's a little bit of something that was there before that you have to work with, right? And so in a way there's, oh, sorry, can we go back? In a way there's memory to these structures. And over the years it will shed its skin, but it'll still keep a little bit of what used to be there. And this is something that connects cultures across time. And this was kind of what started our discussion. Yeah, go ahead. And so we came up with an idea of what does Hong Kong feel like within this context? How does it emotionally feel to an outsider coming in and insiders, and how can we create a shared structure, a shared work of art that makes sense within this. And so this is a little bit of our ideas, our feelings. This is kind of what we're thinking about. It's a mix of kind of two, we sort of came across two major themes. One is the repetitive patterns, the geometric shapes that are everywhere in Hong Kong. And it's true, they're in pretty much any city you can go to. But I would say absolutely a much higher amount in Hong Kong than almost anywhere I've been. It's very geometric. It's almost like, especially if you look at it far away, you can see sort of Legos put together. But not all of them are absolutely perfect, right? There's a lot of repetition, but there's a little bit of changes in there. And, you know, I'm not the first to say this. You can see lots of works about this, trying to understand the architecture of Hong Kong, but I think this is an important aspect. And, I mean, the kind of three-dimensional collage art of the street signs, right, throughout history. This is a place where there's a dialogue of history happening every day, and it's almost completely filling the skyline in certain places. So these were the two sort of themes that we were talking about. And then another quote. Sorry to have two quotes, but this is somebody who kind of, a New York artist, Robert Smithson, known for earthworks arts. And he also talks a lot about spaces, about history of spaces, and about architecture in his work. And we were approaching it in this way. The word color means at its origin to cover or hide. Matter eats up light and covers it with a confusion of color. And in kind of a way that's almost describing projection mapping and how it works, and specifically what we were trying to approach. And so we came up with this visualization to start. Buildings with some animation that also include this collage, this three-dimensional collage of signs, advertisements, right, throughout history, right, and trying to get a little bit of that repetition within the structures, but slight changes, very geometric shapes. Let's move forward. And so here's our sort of colorless version. Hopefully you get a chance to see it. We have the large-scale version that is touring around the mainland at this time. We'll be in Hong Kong. It's the 6th, right? December 6th. And then the one that we have here is over here, 3D printed. But this is basically the sort of its naked form, its pure form. And then, of course, we added animation to that. Next slide, please. And this was our collaboration coming together. Finally, envisioning these themes and thoughts that we all had, and we hope that it evokes in you a little bit of that idea that this is a sort of physical representation of that memory, a little bit more literal of how spaces have emotion and feeling and memories to them. Next slide. And we hope that you will also, if you can, join the artwork. Play, feel like you are a part of it, right? The small version that we have here, obviously you can't stand in it, but I hope you feel like you can go reach out and touch it. That was kind of our initial idea, was we wanted to be able to play on these street signs and buildings and things. And finally, we have a video. Are we able to switch here? Oh. And this is mostly just to give you an idea of the full-scale version. I think some of you were able to see it, but most of us have been able to see that small-scale version. We also haven't seen the full-scale version yet ourselves. Yeah, we wanted to go to Beijing and Hangzhou, but you know, it didn't work it out in the cards for us. So we're excited to see it once it comes to Hong Kong. Yeah.
Come all the way with my outfit, and hope you can also dress like me when you are in Hong Kong, because this is how I bring the thing to New York. We hope you enjoy to be part of the art. We hope you want to be part of the architecture, and that is how you go beyond it, because you need to be there.
Yeah, this is just a short thing we put together, mostly of the Hong Tao installation. But yeah, again, just like Zoe was saying, be a part of it, right? Play with it, right? It's not just an artwork to be isolated on itself. We hope that you feel a sort of connection to it, and that it also sort of evokes maybe small spaces near your homes, small spaces where you are just, being introduced for the first time. You see something a little bit old, another structure that was brand new, and how do they interact with each other? That was a little bit of what we were trying to do here. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Zoe. I think what is interesting was that both the Vivian and Paul's presentation is about storytelling. I think part of that is about it's not just going to see the exhibit itself, but also the story that it's trying to tell behind. And I think, but having said that, I think we all perhaps interpret, as Paul says, maybe evoke a little image of your memories of yours and so on. Yeah, I look forward to seeing the real thing in Hong Kong too, in the real size. So, thank you. The next speaker we have, it's a lady that, well, right at the beginning when we were organizing the exhibition, we were saying, oh, well, we need somebody who in New York to help us. And then a name came up several times. And Felita, originated from Hong Kong, studied at CUHK, and then Cornell. Yeah, so she's been working in New York for quite some time, and she's now working at Rotterdam Stern's office. And I think you were away on holiday when they visited your office yesterday, but hybrid. So anyway, Felita, please come up and share with us your thought on your take on Beyond Territory. Thank you very much.
I hope you can see me behind this the stand, but I was hoping that this would be a very kind of informal sharing session, but I'm very happy and humbled to be here after 10 years graduating from actually CUHK, to be here and sharing my experiences working in New York City for almost a decade now. And I've always been very interested in the built environment, and I've always set my tone into practicing. And I've always interested in the different cultures that brings working in a city, immersing yourself in an environment, and challenging yourself at different points of life. Currently, I am at Robert A.M. Stern. I've worked on maybe 2 firms or 3 firms in the city since I graduated. So I wanted to maybe talk about three sections in my presentation into describing how I actually extended myself beyond territories, geographically, professionally, and academically, perhaps. So the first step it's making, so recently after you guys all traveled from Hong Kong, and I wasn't able to travel for 2 years, so I made a trip to Portugal, and I went to Casa Sevilles, and it's by the acclaimed Alvaro Siza, and I think how interesting it is when it's an emblematic architecture where the architecture immerses itself within the landscape and the art. And when you walk in, you feel like it sort of inspires you to be a better architect in a way, because it's thinking itself as a city. So if you're in Porto, you realize it's a city of old and new. And when you're in Casa Sevilles, you realize that it's also a combination between the old and the new, where Caesar created different pavilions within the landscape. And what's so interesting is when I went into to see the art exhibition, there's actually Joe Merrill's art. And he also challenges himself by, in his later phase in life, where he like pours petrol in his painting, he burns it, and he cuts and like creates like different moments in the architecture. And so a little bit background again, I graduated 2010, I did a year out. I worked in Japan for 3 months, and then I graduated from Cornell master's degree, 3-year program, and worked in the States for almost 8 now. So I think the education in Hong Kong and US is very different. And the little things that, it's actually, I did a art class, almost an architecture class. It's a collage class, but it's teaching you how to see space differently on a plan or a section, or how you make things through a process. So this is a group project that we did, and it's collaborative. I think in architecture, in a sense, we always claim that a project, I did this project, or I did that project. But I think the process, it's a collaboration between a lot of the members. And a lot of times as you grow as an architect, your role changes, or you realize that what you wanted to do in the profession changes as the time goes by. And there's no preset values on how you want to do it. So this is what we did. We laid out like newspapers from random New York Times or like the Times, and we placed it on a board and we layered it. And we didn't really communicate between the team on how we're gonna do this art, but we just randomly placed paper in it. So we're like, oh, what are we creating? So I think architects, we create, but at the same time we create a system, and then we also organize it and then create something with a deeper meaning through the experience of it. So we started painting like white paint on it, and then later on we created like a cityscape, like a grid, so that we see like little moments of it that became interesting. So I think later on with this canvas, we created little blocks of these moments where we each interpreted it differently. So later on, when I graduated, I wanted to show this project that I did with a small firm called Studio V, and it's a building next to the LIRR. And the same way we did, we tried to create a pattern for the facade. We were thinking, we had like a panel. We knew that it was a system of precast panels, so we created a grid and see how these little spaces can interact with the bedroom sizes or the kitchen sizes. So I'm just going to run through these. And so with 400 units, we created this pattern of facade, and we wanted to create a variation between each of these elevations. So I think what's interesting also practicing is we're also doing a lot of different aspects, like the life safety drawings, the interiors of the spaces, and how these projects actually interact with the public space. So finally, we actually, in the end, we built this project, and I'm super proud that this sort of making process has actually carried me through in the professional life. Yeah. So afterthoughts is, since this project, I've been actually actively working in the BIM side of the process. So it actually created me opportunities into working at Robert Amster now to be more like a BIM role in coordinating a lot of problems with the MEP or structural engineering. So I hope you enjoy this really short but succinct presentation about how I had my experiences working in the States. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Felita. I hope you enjoy our exhibition. I think we've kind of been on the phone a few times talking about it throughout the last few months, and then and talking of which, we have one more presentation from one of our exhibitors, Cocoon. And I think both Owen and Jessica has been explaining to a number of our guests about their presentation. But now, please come on stage and tell us a bit more about how you come the design and so on and so forth. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. First, we would like to thank HKIA and M3 curatorial team for having us here. I'm Jessica and he is Owen, and we are from the team Cocoon Architecture and Flow Studio. We would like to talk about the how we see the Beyond Territories, the theme, in two ways. From the collaborations between us and Cocoon and how our exhibits express that way. Some of you may know Cocoon Architecture is run by Mei Chiu and Sunny Yong. They are the Hong Kong registered architects and are actively involved in academic and community activities, such as being juror and registration committee. And Owen and me are Mei Chiu students, and now we have been graduated from years and become registered architects. We'll say the relationship of us, Mei and Sunny, are beyond the territories on generations and through times, from the relationship of teacher and student, employment relationship, and now in collaboration. I'm still working in Cocoon Architecture currently, and me and Noah started our own practice, a flow studio, last year. Yesterday, we had a chat with Helen, and she wondered if young architects like us, leaving the traditional practice so early and start our own practice, how do we feel about lacking of practical experience? In our case, through our collaborations with Cocoon, our learning process do not end, and furthermore, we also share some new and innovative ideas and techniques with Mei and Sunny. We believe that this lifelong teacher and student relationship, which beyond the territories of generations and time, could benefit the knowledge, and is a good tradition to pass on in Hong Kong, which allow the young idea and energy to contribute to the field. And also, we are so happy to see Professor Brian McGrath here. And in college times, we have been attended the international design workshop directed by Brian. And we are so happy to meet him again in New York in this event. And this is also how we think beyond territories can be experienced in this relationship. And I'm now going to pass to Owen to share some more about our exhibits. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Owen, and I'm going to share some the inspiration, where the inspiration come from for our exhibition in this event. On the right-hand side, there is some kado, which is a Japanese style flower arranging art, which is done by Jessica. And on the left-hand side are some the panjing, which is Chinese the tray plants. From this practice, or from this interest we develop beside architectural study, we inspire that how we to observe the city. Because no matter for the panjing and the kado, also talking about the observation of the harmony of nature with a consideration with time and space. And also in the maybe in the Taoiseum thinking, a tray plant could be just a tray plant, but it also can be a garden or even a city or even the whole world. It just depends on the observer's understanding and the imagination of the scale. So scale is pretty important in our project. And this also inspired us to observe the city in an other perspective. And these are some photos taken from the urban area, and we find that the nature, the power of nature, which is grow in the man-made environment occasionally and spontaneously, also inspires that how powerful is the nature is, and how we can find a new relationship between the man-made and the nature in our city for the maybe the further development. So jump into the our project, the 4x4, the power of 4x4, which is a very brief study on the 4 cities: Hangzhou, Beijing, New York, and Hong Kong in 4 different scale. And from the very beginning, we zoom into the city aerial map by different scale. And after that, we have some models to really placing the mosses and plants on the 3D models to make a 4x4 set 16 models to see the relationship between the man-made blocks and the in-between space, and how the nature can fill into the in-between space in the city. So maybe this is not cannot provide a actual answer that what is go next in the future. It is more like a demonstration on the way how we can explore our city, and how we can explore a new relationship between man-made and the nature in different perspective and scale. And I also want to show this is another installation, also sharing the similar idea, which is a concrete with a crack, and I try to place the animals and little trees on it. And this installation is telling a more a detailed way how we would like to bury the boundary between the man-made environment and the nature. So when we're talking about beyond the territories, what I think is, if we can bury the boundary and get rid of the binary opposition between 2 medium, and there will be no more territories, and this is what the ultimate goal should be. And finally, I also want to share this idea. It's not just applying to a physical space or in our city. It is also related to our living styles and also some human habits. As I know, some of the young members here, just like us, they have been developing their own interests beside architectural design and study, like photography or some handcraft or art creations. And I think those activities allowed us architects to be more all-rounded and able to contribute to the city and the community as an architect in different ways. And this is how we can go beyond the territories. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you very much, Owen. Next, yes, well, that was, thank you for the introductions as well, because our next speaker is Professor McGrath. And when we first talked, I think we realized that there was, well, one thing that I realized is that, you talk about what's the phrase? 7 degrees of separation. One thing about Hong Kong is probably about 1 or 2. And then when we talk about how are we connected, obviously Professor McGrath has been involved with Zhihui College as well, with their course structure and so on. And it's turned out, throughout the last 2 days, we realized that there were a lot of different connections that we made when we were in Hong Kong, and these people, we all kind of interconnected. So. And also, you brought your students. You had a studio of a professor had a studio of 12 students. They were all from 12 different countries as well, and they all came and visited our exhibition. And I hope they enjoyed it. And anyway, I wouldn't take much of your time. And please, Professor, thank you very much.
And sound is off. Thank you so much. And thank you, Owen and Jessica, for your work. it's just a great honor to see students after 10 years, I think, since we did the workshop, and see tremendous work. Congratulations, Hong Kong Institute for Architects. I assumed you were much older than 25 years because the authority you present to me when I try to argue for Chuhai's accreditation over the past 14 years. So it's been a 14th year advisory role, and I know Bernard from that process as well, and so I assumed you're at least 100 years old. So, and a little bit about the background of how I came to Chuhai in 2008. My first visit to Hong Kong was in 1987 as a kind of gateway trip to a quite extensive tour across China, and I was lucky enough in the 1990s to teach at the Advanced Architecture and Urban Design program at Columbia for 15 years, where the majority of my students were from Asia at that time, really the rapid growth of Asian cities. And so I was lucky enough to first get invited in Bangkok at Chulalongkorn University as a Fulbright scholar 25 years ago. And so I've been teaching there for 25 years. And have a house in Chiang Mai, which I'll be talking a little bit about. But then in 2008, Paul became the director of this new program, and so he invited me to assist him as an academic advisor. But at the same time, we created an international program at Chulalongkorn in Bangkok, and another former student at Columbia started teaching at NCKU in Taiwan. And so I don't know if you went to all three cities, but we had our Milk Tea Alliance in a long time before it became popular a few years ago. So anyways, without further ado, I do have, because I'm a professor, I'll talk for half an hour, so I have to show you a video which is timed to 10 minutes, just so I don't go over. But the video is about Chiang Mai, Thailand, and the workshops that we've been doing there. And I had prepared marks that I'll read to you. But for me, looking at the show and thinking about Beyond Territories, it shows the importance of Hong Kong as a model. And so I'm going to play it, and I'm going to say a few words of, this is the problem, and I think Hong Kong is the solution. Yeah, if you just start it, I'll start talking. In January 2020, 10 students from Chulalongkorn University arrived at Chiang Mai Airport, a short trip from Bangkok. 12 Parsons students flew in from New York, Manila, Prague, Rio de Janeiro, Zurich, Boston, Houston, Cairo, Karachi, Dhaka, and Beijing. We all met at Doi Hom Guest House in the foothills of Mae Kwon Dam. Chiang Mai, Thailand comprises 2 rivers and 2 cities. One in red is the modern sprawl along New Highway from the historical center on the Mae Ping. The second, yellow, is the intricate network of rice farming villages within the Mae Kwon Basin. From Doi Hom, 3 vans shuttled us from Doi Hom along the northeast radiating highway to the Outer Ring Road. Both roads offer lessons in the destruction of ribbon development, strangling the land of 1 million rice fields. As land zoned for agricultural preservation becomes commercial strips and gated communities. We traveled between 2 city metabolisms, one along the radial and ring highways, and another on off-road city village networks, where we spotted 4 farming settlements separated by white rice paddy fields. Our drawings are spatial ethnographies of the lives and stories of ordinary villagers, maneuvering the desicota between these 2 worlds. Just off the highways, a complex of winding rural roads crosses a community-managed irrigation system comprising a matrix of care that has proved resilient during previous shocks, such as the economic crisis of 1997 and the extreme floods in 2011, and now post-pandemic uncertainty. The 7-kilometer stretch of the Mekong that passes under the outer ring road has been my backyard for 20 years. From my home, I learned to navigate the winding rural lanes and off-road trails for two-wheelers along the river and major canal embankments. The large landscape comprises a matrix of care connecting 4 villages, 4 weirs, and canals irrigating hundreds of paddies and 4 large rice fields. Over the years, I was able to befriend informants of each weir and village. The keeper of the river included the obsessive builder of 4 shelters where he took care of stray dogs, a favorite shady fishing spot, a woodworker labored next to one of the weirs, and a fish hatchery and water hyacinth harvesting station is located above the 4th weir. My initial fieldwork formed the basis of 3 years of workshops focusing on compound house structures of the 4 villages. Here we see Village 1 occupies the northeast corner of a small rice field and a temple and school situated in the northwest corner. Within the village, we have been welcomed by a group of young sisters who have been expanding an indigo factory in their mother's family compound, selling T-shirts to local Bangkok tourist markets. Several Christian missionaries encircled the village with school kids we talked to were Hill Tribe orphans and children of guest workers from Burma. There's a large woodworking compound further south, and it's only during the last workshop that we met the matriarch of the village, who creates needlepoint embroidery as source work for fashion designers. She embodied the architectural space as matrix of care and the matrilineal compound houses of the villages, and fulfilled the feminist framing of the workshops as articulated by Sulamith Hines Potter's fieldwork on the family structure of Chiang Mai. Over the course of 3 workshops, we witnessed the demolition of the old temple of Village 2 and its new construction concrete. The village stretches west from the temple to a community space near the river. South of the temple is the old headquarters, the old headman's mother-in-law's compound. A gate between her house and the row of rentals for immigrant workers leads to an outdoor dining area. The headman has built a working model of King Rama IX's sufficiency economy, a way for the kingdom's farmers to be self-sufficient and to absorb the shocks of future global economic crisis following the catastrophe of 1997. Beyond the house compound is a vermiculture, chicken, livestock area, fish ponds surrounded by vegetable gardens, and behind a dozen rice paddies fed by the small canals that we had just crossed. The retired headman of Village 3 occupies his mother-in-law's compound house in the heart of the village. Here he described multiple community efforts he has done over the years. At the river, he built a public sala, a covered pavilion, which serves as a meeting and educational center for maintaining water quality and fish habitat. A short stroll northwest to a community garden and organic vegetables and composting shared by the villagers. At his house, he demonstrates a banana puree technique for reducing microbes in water. And then the road continues past a car repair shop, plastic bottle recycling compound, and we imagine the circular economy for the village. Finally, the road leads to the village temple, which occupies an idyllic spot with a meditation center beyond. Finally, Village 4 is the village I live next to. It has close access to the Handicraft Highway to the south. As a result, the village has a large number of convenience stores as well as ceramic tile workshop and showroom and a woven handbag shop and workshop as well. The temple is very popular, and our main informant was the matriarch of the compound, who runs a noodle shop, and where we could interview her and her customers. Behind the noodle shop is a small office of her brother, a medium and exorcist who can help with problems related to ghosts. The compound provides a spatial matrix of care, providing nourishment for body, mind, and soul. Finally, scaling up. Tracing the Land of a Million Rice Fields explores how contemporary design-based fieldwork nurtures an architectural understanding of what we call the matrix of care. The dense rice farming villages comprised of dynamic matrilineal compound houses within community irrigation networks comprise the majority of land use in the Mekong Valley. And our structural knowledge goes beyond village prospects or village projects or villages and can inform larger planning decisions. Student projects were our annual gift in return for the villagers' hospitality. We're always pleased when they, some of our discussions are actually inaugurated in the village, and they display the students' drawings from the previous years. Our spatial ethnographies of the Mekong, while they offer a radical shift towards a dynamic, patchy, and diffuse urban form that is not part of the borrowed modern planning vocabulary, but it has a substantial history that we found necessary to document. While the Chiang Mai workshops have been the basis of the senior capstone studio at Parsons, they also have been introduced as part of Chula's design experimental workshop called DEX. In January 2021, I conducted a remote DEX workshop during the first COVID crackdown in Bangkok. Called The Ecology of the Soi, or Lane, each student conducted fieldwork within a 5-minute walk of their homes. The fieldwork consisted of short walks dispersed across Bangkok metropolitan region, some next to family houses, some from their dormitory apartments. Together, they provide considerable information about contemporary life in the Bangkok region. One project in the heart of the city near Victoria Monument documents the slow dance between cars, back of truck vendors, motorcycle taxi drivers, and the many students who occupy the small dormitory apartments in the area. The slow movement of the soi is matched by the slow food preparation, where vendors cook fresh to the customer's taste, spicy, sour, salty, sweet. This workshop is a model for the future field work that starts from home, but is networked across multiple field sites into larger scale fields of action to face the twin challenges of social inequity and climate crisis. Back in New York, and parallel to the remote spatial ethnographic workshops, my students conduct their own field work in New York. How can architects spatialize stories and capture fleeting spatial practices through weekly walks and autoethnography? We document neighborhoods in New York and call them microhistories. We transcribe microhistories that are embedded in these neighborhoods. Townhouse shops, building fronts, balconies, streets, sidewalks become a large matrix that is embedded within services of care in the Sunset Park neighborhood, where front spaces become urban gardens for the multi-generational homes, building fronts, laundry services, and balconies and extensions of the living rooms as making spaces. These glimpses are then transcribed into sketches, modeled, and into drawings, exploring the neighborhood's hybridization of occupancy. And so some acknowledgments there at the end of it. But I just now wanted to make that connection of Hong Kong as a model. My experience of Hong Kong is Shenzhen, which for me is the heart of Hong Kong. It's this old fishing village that connected up land into clan villages. And so over the 14 years of working, or 10 years before they moved their campus, of working there, we really got to know the history of Hong Kong. It's a history of villages and villagers and immigrants who came when the new factories were built. The Shanghai mills were brought to Shenzhen. It was the first factory town, the first town that was planned as a new town. And in the first place where this idea of a district citizen was put in, where they would connect the clan, the headmen of the clan villages, and the union organizations of the workers, and the various immigrant groups would form sports groups or groups based on the region of China that they came from. So for me, I mean, the exhibition is glorious and beautiful and wonderful about the architecture in Hong Kong, but the architecture of Hong Kong. And I think you guys spoke beautifully about it. The memory and the history of the city is so ever present. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. So the next section we have, it's a discussion panel. So first of all, may I ask, the first session will be hosted by Helen. Helen, and we will also have Zhao Loken. We will also have Horta. We will also have Kenneth, Sue-Ann, and Christy on stage. We will just grab some chairs out and for you guys to come and have a chat with us about what you've learned today.
Okay. Before we start the sharing among the panelists, I would like to share a book that I feel it's very fascinating for architects. It's a book written by Professor Alan Lightman. It's called Einstein's Dream. The book composed of a lot of short chapters. In each of the chapter, it's described a city that is of different dimension of time and space. In one city, it is like that. The passage of time up high the hill is slower than that. It's close to the harbor. That means people living up the hill would have a longer life than those lived close to the harbor. As you may imagine, most of the people may choose to live up high the hill because that would have a longer life. But not quite. Some people, they still would like to choose to live close to the harbor because they like the sea breeze, they like the tide very much. To me, choosing to be an architect is just like those who choose to live close to the harbor. Because architects always request ourselves to live a life that we love rather than a life that is longer. So we always ask ourselves to go beyond, and we always have a much demanding life to ourselves. So we have a group of young architects here on the stage. I myself feel highly inspired by going through the past few days with them, because I would ask myself again, why we choose to be an architect. So the question is, what is your planning for the next 10 years to go beyond as an architect? So maybe we start from those who think you prepared to answer the question first.
All right, I go first.
Okay, Loken, you go first.
Well, I would put it this way. These few days we have been walking around New York. We have seen many people. We have casual chats. We have symposiums. We have visited some of the firms in the United States. We are going to visit some more tomorrow. Interesting enough, with the words I hear the most here in the United States, in New York, are narrative, branding, presentation, storytelling, lifestyles. Now, these words are something foreign to me because, well, I used to consider myself as someone with a European architectural background. Not saying I received architectural education in Europe, but I'm more on the other side of the discourse. You know, maybe I'm wrong, so please correct me if I'm wrong. When we talk about architecture, we talk about ontology, we talk about authenticity, we talk about material presence, we talk about impacts and human behaviors and non-human behaviors. So it seems to me, you know, when we're talking about narratives, it is like on the completely opposite side of architectural discourse. And here in M3, in the exhibition, what I find very interesting is we were in Hangzhou, and then we go to Beijing, and then we are in New York, and then we go back to Hong Kong. In the Beijing Symposium, what I was inspired most was a presentation by Professor Zhang Li from Tsinghua University. So he tabled an architectural discourse in a table, there are two axes. One is y-axis, one is x-axis. So on the x-axis, he put object and subject. On the y-axis, he put analytical and analog. I repeat, object, subject, analytical, and analog. And he said, that's his opinion, not my opinion. Huh? Narrative is something on the analog and subjective side. And that is something completely foreign to me. So, and I'm surprised that when we are coming to New York, many practices would have talked a lot about presentation and client relationships and narratives. Well, maybe that's a way to explain architecture to clients that are not in the profession. And that's how you build a narrative to convince the clients who may not share the same opinion or value with yourself as a professional architect. And that's something I would like to share. Thank you.
And who go next?
For me, yes. For me, through studying the architecture, while somebody is looking for how the future vision of the world will be, for me, I will look back and focus more about the history of the 20th century. Because when learning architecture, I found that many of the 20th century modernist ideas are really linked to the politics side, like the utopia, like the communist idea, and really looking through this history, I find that we still need more narrative to explain what's happened in the past, and through the vision of an architect, I wish to discover the page of this history furthermore.
Thank you. And
hi, I'm Christy, HAI member. So corresponding to your questions, what you think 10 years later, what I will be doing? It's definitely a lot easy questions to answer because you think back a decade ago, like you can't imagine what you would be like now, like in 10 years time. But if you think back why you want to become an architect, I think it's definitely like you want to be a creator, you want to be creating something new in a city. And I think architecture would always be the core medium for me to know about the people, the city, and all aspects of life. I think, the spirit will still be in me. Although I'm not sure if I will still be an architect in 10 years' time, but like people here, they're also doing like multidisciplinary role, but maybe they still have some architecture background. So I think I'm imagining something like this, like you have this kind of spirit in yourself, and then this become like the way you approach different aspects of life. Yeah, that's my thinking. Yeah, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Kenneth, and I agree with Christy's idea that this is really a tough question because at this moment I don't have a really concrete plan for the coming 10 years. So probably I will just share some thoughts regarding this trip. After this New York trip, what something inspired me, and about Beyond Territory. And actually, in this week, we have visited many different places, and something just inspired me is that something could be said regarding Beyond Territory is actually an artwork and architecture, because I visited the Silver Towers designed by IMP, and there is a big Picasso's sculpture in the central plaza, in the plaza there, and I think that because of that dynamic sculpture, it actually enriched the whole space. And the artwork inside actually make the architecture or make the space even more inspiring and more interesting. And from the other sides or other points of view, that architecture itself could actually become a sculpture or an art object, like Bank of China. Because its special shape actually give foreigner or give the local people a very strong image of Hong Kong. And from the New York City, we have the World Trade Center, One World Trade Center tower. And from the podium design, we could see that there are very many interesting fences. The design of fences, it actually reflecting because of this special configuration and having facing to different direction, it actually reflecting the cities, reflecting the beautiful scenery and the memory of there. And that's all of what I want to share. Thanks.
Thank you. And then the last is Joanne.
Yes, thank you. That is definitely a daunting question when you're bombarded with such a big question on your life. That makes me immediately go back to what I would have thought of myself being when I was in 10 years ago. Would I imagine myself to be here? Is like, I would not. I was an architect. I was practicing as a local architect, building residential and other building types in Hong Kong, focusing on Hong Kong jobs, not even the mainland China jobs. And then after a few years, I got, I thought about what I signed up for when I chose architecture as a student might not be limited to that. And then from then on, after a few years of practice, I tried to expand my career, like beyond doing pure architecture. I tried to do exhibition venue design. I did a bamboo pavilion for an exhibition. I tried to be an exhibitor at the HKIA exhibitions by doing some jewelry that is inspired by buildings in Hong Kong. And then coming from that, I partnered with my friends to do a ETO sponsored an exhibition in London, which very coincidentally have a topic that is very similar to what we have today. That back then in 2019, the topic was boundaries, and what we interpreted at that time before the pandemic and before the COVID was we thought about the boundaries being something physical, or it is something that is in your mind also. How do we break the boundaries in our mind of being a profession that is concentrating in our own little world of the professional world, or are we part of the bigger world that we are contributing to the human civilization and the culture? So I think if I am to project myself of my trajectory in the upcoming 10 years, I would only say I hope I am still energetic enough to gear towards transcending a position that is professional as onto something that is even more than that. I will try. I can only say I try.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a question that we all would like to ask myself from time to time, and it is definitely no correct or wrong answer, because each of us living a different life, and as an architect we always pursue to go beyond, and it is a good start. And I think in both the New York and Hong Kong there is a plenty of opportunities for architects to pursue his or her own visions and live a life that is of quality rather than a longer life that achieve nothing. Thanks for all. That's all I'm sharing.
That concludes the first session of today. So can we take a minute break, and we'll reconvene here in 11:45. So to begin the second session. Thank you very much, and see you shortly. Thank you.
David? Yes, I have it. I did it. I just need a, yeah. Hi, Alex. Yes, of course. I'm good, thank you. I'm Hayne, by the way. Yeah, we've been emailing.
How was your trip?
Oh, good. Yeah, I've like no jet lag anymore. Settled in, yeah.
Have you been to New York before?
Yeah, I went to college in Philly.
Okay.
So,
Roger asked me if I could show some videos.
Oh.
My slides don't have the videos.
Yes.
They are on the internet. Will I be able to connect to the internet?
you should be. Let me try test that out right now. If you can, yeah. Kevin's MacBook Pro, and I think you can just airdrop it. Yeah.
Okay. How do I do that? I'm sorry, I'm not so
Oh, no
familiar.
worries. Oh no. Do you know where this file is?
Let me save it. And then.
Yeah. So. Is it on YouTube? YouTube or?
I think the easiest place would be my website, and because, and if it is the case, it'll.
Curve architecture?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can type that in super quickly. No worries, take your time.
If this works, it'll have everything in one place, but when I click, I want to see if it goes to the right place. Because I do this from the office where we're logged in.
Oh, right.
So here there's a lot of stuff I can show, and then if that's not it. If this works, then we're good.
Oh no. Oh, it's working. Nope. Wait,
It, like it wants to.
Quickly accept that really quickly. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. Wait, let's try the.
But there's so many other options that maybe that'll work.
This
works?
works.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll have this page up. So you'd like to show your share your PDF first, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna. It's like for an hour and a half, so I'm gonna skip through.
That's a
I'm gonna
long.
keep it short.
Thank you. So I have this, and I think I'll put this on full screen for you, and then once you're done, you can just exit and go to that Safari page, and then I'll be right over here, so you can call me if, yeah. No worries. No. Postcode new. This one. Okay, so.
Hopefully you place all the script there.
Yeah, wait, let's test it out. Full screen. Oh, let's test it on the screen. Really. Why is this? Oh, it's not full screen. Slideshow. Just on those pages, right? Wait, check 3, 4, and then it goes to 15, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
And then it goes to like 22,
15.
right? 15.
Yep.
And then it goes to 22. After 22, it goes 25. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. 29. It should be fine, right?
Yeah, I think it should be fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, I will. I just want to test one more before we test. There's like so many files I'm working with. No, it's okay. And then some people have PDF, they have video, they have
this window. this window. We have less than 30 seconds to place it.
Coming back, we're about to start the second session of today's symposium. We have quite a few speakers for this session. Some from actually, I just realized they're sort of old friends from the US for some of you, and also we have some of our PSP members coming to share their thoughts as well. I heard a word sort of. Didn't think it was so, it was supposed to be casual. It is casual, despite the stage and everything. Just relax, chill. It is. You're not being critiqued or judged or anything. Just a good old kind of sharing your thoughts and so on. So the first speaker we have is David Mallett. He's well, as it happens, he's actually a friend of some of you already, and from AI Planet Works. And by the sound of it, he's going to take us all the way up somewhere and then back to Earth again. So thank you very much, David. I look forward to hearing. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Nice. So just a bit on my background. I'm an architect, and my focus was on the super high-rise. And actually, I've worked with Florence for 8 years on the project on the right, the Ping An Finance Center, Julia, briefly together on ICC, which is the one in the middle. So it's great to see familiar faces in the crowd. So that was during my tenure at KPF, and then 5 years ago started a new company. And the idea was to be different. So it wasn't just an architectural design practice, but one which really integrated technology. So architectology is kind of a terrible word, but for lack of a better one, that's what we were. So not just designers, but software developers and mechanical engineers, material scientists, all in sort of one big, messy company. Since then, we've sort of organized and split it out. So our design studio is AI Planet Works, which still, collaborates with the tech side of the company, on projects which are really tech-orientated, such as the Mars habitat, but also these IoT-enabled designs, which are built projects. But I wanted to talk today more about what we're doing on the space factory side of the equation, because it is more relevant to topics. So literally, beyond architecture, building beyond Earth. Okay. So my fascination with space really goes back to childhood, and there's something about the future potential of space which is so captivating. But why is it necessary to go to space? And so if you look at what's happening on Earth, and around the time I got interested in space was with Carl Sagan and these people back in the 80s. And they always talked about space, but in the context of Earth and what as a species we're doing to our planet. And if you look, sort of where we're heading, like, this is just, I'm sure you all know what this is, but Easter Island, at one point was believed to be a thriving civilization of 10 to 12,000 people, but eventually they exhausted the resources of this island. And the civilization collapsed. And so there's this thought about people who researched this, and they said that in a limited ecosystem, selfishness, as in human selfishness, ultimately leads to extinction. Okay, and as a species, like, now that we're building on the Earth, and certainly if I look back, to my childhood and now, the situation has not gotten better. It's gotten a lot worse. Okay, and it's not to say that we can't or should prevent, countries from, like China, from urbanizing, and should we limit countries like India, from urbanizing, or the rest of the world? if everyone in the world lived like Americans, like if the other 7.5 billion people in the world lived like Americans do, in terms of our resource consumption, like we would deplete the planet. Okay, so there's only really one solution, which is we need to start exploring how to live off planet. Okay, of course, this is the current state of things. Earth population 7.753 billion, Mars 0. There's 14 people currently in space. I just realized there's this website. It's called whoisinspace.com. So you can see the number of people who are actually currently just in Earth orbit on the ISS. Okay? And now the Chinese have a space station as well. So the problem with building in space or building on Mars or colonizing Mars is fundamentally cost. Okay, so there's, up until the Chinese built their space station, and they probably did it more efficiently than NASA did 20 years ago. The building, this is the price tag of the ISS. Okay, and I think to date it's hosted about 250 people. So if you think about it, that's $500 million per person to live off planet. And the reason for that is really the cost of getting material off Earth and into space. So the ISS was built on Earth and launched to space in modules and assembled in space. So kind of the way to think about it simply is to get to space for every 10% of payload, the actual stuff that you carry, you need 90% rocket. Okay, once you go to Mars, it's more like 1% payload, 99% rocket. Okay, so there's a huge inefficiency to transporting material off Earth. So if we look at a typical American home of say 2,000 to 3,000 square feet that weighs 100,000 kilograms, the numbers start to mushroom. Okay, so on Earth, let's just say it's $1 per kilogram, it's a 100K house. Low Earth orbit, LEO, okay, 320 million. That's the current price that SpaceX offers its customers. Once you get to the moon, it's a little bit more conjectural, but $1 billion, okay, or $10,000 per kilogram to the moon, the lunar surface. And Mars, current estimate, $45,000 per kilogram. So that same home on Earth, that's $100,000 of a material, is $4.5 billion if you were to ship it to Mars. Okay, so when Elon talks about Mars City and you look at the footprint of all those buildings, you're probably looking at trillions and trillions of dollars of infrastructure if it were all Earth brought. So the solution isn't just an architectural one, but it needs to become a technological one where you're not using material from Earth, but you are using material that you extract locally. So this concept of in situ resource utilization. So at a high level, the idea would be to send robots to the Mars first, harvest material that you can collect on the Martian surface, and then autonomously 3D print, not just habitats, but roads, landing pads, other kind of infrastructure that would support human settlement in advance of the humans getting there. So by the time that you get to Mars, that's sort of the safety, the shelters that you need and the infrastructure that you need is already in place. Okay, so it's a kind of high-tech way of going back to what architecture used to be, which is living off of the land, building with the materials that you would find close to your site. So I've been really intrigued by this because it's like a space age meets Stone Age kind of juxtaposition in that the very first, say, permanent buildings, and not these sort of inflatable or origami type structures that you send out, the first permanent buildings that we would build off planet are really made from 3D printed rock. Okay, the particular material that we've been using in our prints is this basalt fiber compound. So basalt is a rock that's very prevalent on the moon and prevalent on Mars. Okay, And our focus has been to mix this with the minimal amount of biopolymer, okay, which in the future could be synthesized from, like, say, Martian CO2 or from algae that's grown, on Mars. And the two of these things together sort of form this, thermoplastic composite that, when melted, can be printed into habitat. So this was our design, Marcia, and I think the why Marcia looks like an egg is almost like a whole nother architectural lecture, but I wanted to show you the other side of what we're doing, which is that we're not just thinking about these, but we're working very actively to prototype these out and to develop the technologies to enable it. So in my mind, and I think one of the reasons I wanted to start this sort of, quasi-architecture technology company was that, architecture used to be extremely innovative when put in the context of other technologies. So if you look back in the Middle Ages, like, humankind's crowning achievements were buildings. But then if you look at the state of things today, architecture has changed very little, and innovation has been in IT, in computing, and these other areas. So to really advance architecture forward and to find solutions for building off planet, it's not just a design problem, it's a technological challenge. So where the technologies don't exist, our company is focused on closing those knowledge gaps and developing the technology to make it happen. So what you're looking at is, after we designed that Mars habitat, we entered the final phase of the NASA Centennial Challenge, which was to 3D print the prototype in 3 days, completely autonomously from that Mars relevant material, that biopolymer PLA composite. Okay, and you can see this is the final moments where we had to crown it with a skylight. Okay, and for those of you familiar, the skylight fell through, but nonetheless, we completed the print and won the NASA Centennial Challenge. Okay, so that was really something exciting for a young company. I think we were 1 or 1.5 years in to our existence to go out and win the NASA Centennial Challenge. Okay, but then it's like suddenly I realized, wow, we're like a 3D printing company now, right? So we had like people on staff, we had a robot. We need to make a business of it, right? And even when you go out and you try to meet with investors and you talk about space, space is risky. Like our space, as in building in space, building on Mars, is like so out there in the future that the investor has to be extremely risk tolerant, or they have to be willing to wait an extremely long time to get a return. So the idea is, to make it viable, we need to find Earth applications. Now, if you think about it, if we're solving this unique challenge of how do you build on Mars, you need something that can run on solar, it's fully autonomous, and it uses local resources. And if you put those 3 things together, it's like that sounds like a great idea on Earth as well. Because when we analyze the problem on Earth, we're really dependent on concrete. Okay? And concrete, the production of cement, contributes something like 7% of the world's carbon emissions every single year. Okay, I think add up steel, then you're probably getting closer to 15%. So just in material, and we're addicted to these materials, we're pumping a lot of CO2 into our environment. So if we're able to go back to our roots, the roots of architecture, and figure out again how we can build with local resources, but with this new sort of high-tech way of doing it, the hypothesis is, can we begin to build structures which are human-rated out of this sort of in-situ derived material with the same kind of performance as you would expect from modern building material. So this was the Terra project, and the objectives of the Terra project were exactly that, is to go out, take that robotic system out into nature, print the habitat, and very soon we discovered the challenges. And it wasn't just the the hardships on the machinery, but it was the sort of the human toll. Okay, and because technology development does take time, and it took longer than we thought, and we were probably unprepared. September turned into November, turned into December, and then we hit blizzards. Because we were building it in this part of the country, and then we hit COVID. Okay, and that sort of like ultimately stopped this first attempt. So we aborted the first attempt. But the mission is ongoing. So taking the lessons learned, and what did we learn from this experience? One is if you're troubleshooting on site, okay, things take too long. Okay, I mentioned the impact of the environment, but lastly, this is important, is brute force is not a scalable solution. So I think as architects, we kind of have the mentality that design can solve all problems, right? That we can design our way out of solutions, and it's kind of like a one for one like way of thinking. But if you really want to develop tech, you can't be designing one-of-ones. Like you need to find solutions where you can do thousands or tens of thousands of these. So I could have brute forced that Terra into existence just by pumping more resources into it, and we would have had one as a showcase, or we could go back to the drawing board and focus on the machine that would then be able to print, hundreds of these, okay, at an economic price. So that's exactly what we did. So this month, and ideally, actually supposed to be yesterday, launching Astra. So Astra is our commercialized 3D printer. So the technology that you saw do the NASA prototype has now been completely refined and integrated, and it works with desktop 3D slicer. So if you printed something on a desktop printer, if you model in Rhino and you slice it up in Cura and you send it to your desktop printer, it's the exact same workflow. So you don't need to know robotics because we've handled that on the back end. Just treat it like a really big desktop printer that can print big things. Okay, so it's all the kind of complexities of the system which had been driving us nuts for Terra are now integrated and automated and self-monitored and regulated. So there's issues we haven't solved, like how to deal with the cold, how to deal with like effectively moving around site, but in terms of how to print in ambient condition, I think we've resolved quite well. Okay, and so here's like the first, I would say, real human-rated structure that we printed. And if I sort of flip the image the other way around, you can understand what it is. It's a footbridge. So it's very thin. Each of those layers is about 20 millimeter thick. Okay, and it's spanning over 5 meters. Okay? Right now it's deflecting because it's not restrained at the base, but nonetheless, I think it proves the ability of our bridge to be functional, not just a demo piece. Okay. The first generation, the one that you saw here, we loaded it to failure, so we put 2,000 pounds on it and cracked the bridge. So now we know how much weight the bridge supports. We did a redesign to reinforce it. We just changed the 3D print geometry, and then the next version of this will be going to upstate New York, where it'll be installed and used as a bridge. Okay. So that's what we're doing on Earth, but on the space side, we're still pushing things forward, and specifically working with NASA, who's now focused on the moon. Okay, and if what we did with NASA and the Centennial Challenge was sort of like a proof of concept or kind of a demo of the technology and its potential, this is really about advancing the technology forward in the environments that we would expect to encounter on the moon. Okay, so it's developing the material from lunar simulant, okay, designing a structure which is optimized for the conditions of the moon, which is different from Mars, and very, very critically testing the system in lunar-like environments, like albeit on Earth. But what that means is testing the system in a vacuum chamber, specifically a hot, cold, dirty vacuum chamber is the term that they use. So one that's filled with this lunar simulant and can go from temperatures of negative 170 degrees up to 70 degrees Celsius. So that's the printing range. Okay? And here is our first successful print in vacuum. Okay, so to our knowledge, it's the first time anyone's 3D printed in vacuum. Okay, and the material is this composite of biopolymer with lunar simulant, okay, which is crushed rock, from Earth, but specifically selected because it shares granular properties with samples that were returned by the Apollo missions. Okay, and then just to give you an idea of the scale, so there's the vacuum chamber. So the build envelope of this system is about 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter cubed. Okay, this is maybe the third or fourth print, okay, where we've, I think, fine-tuned the process parameters and fine-tuned the material composition, okay, to get an extremely smooth print. So what that engineer is holding up, okay, is actually printed with lunar simulant PLA under vacuum conditions. So the next step for us will be to print in what they call hot-cold vacuum, probably at the beginning of next year, and then to integrate the remainders of that system. So in this case, we were just taking pre-made pellets and printing them. So the next step is making the pellets and printing it, or scooping up the regolith and printing it in one shot. So that's what we're going to be focusing on over the next, say, 2 to 3 years, is how to do that full stack process where we can literally send something to the moon, scoop up the regolith, mix it with some binder that we brought with us, and be able to print a structure on the moon. And the timeline for that is 2028. So that's, as a company, is what we're aiming to do, is to put a payload on a NASA CLIPS mission to do the very first permanent structure on the moon. Now, it might be a small one. It might be like a doghouse, okay? But the idea is to be able to start that process, right? And so if you think about when we started the NASA Centennial Challenge to the time that we can potentially, be the first to build on the moon, that's 10 years. But if you look back at that first slide I showed you with those tall buildings, that's about how long each of those projects took. So I guess my point with that is that, as architects, I think we're qualified to contribute to this advance of technology. So we can't just think of ourselves as consumers of it, but certainly I think we can, with the right mindset and the right tools and the right self-education, actually contribute and to be able to push the boundaries of what architecture can do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Yeah, well, it takes a few minutes for us to come back sort of down to Vermatera. So next we have 2 speakers lined up. They were all part of our PSP group, and the first one is Bosco. Bosco, he's not a Hong Kong IA member, but he's a Hong Kong Institute of Landscape Designer, landscape architect, and he's been a landscape, well, he's got a PhD in landscape design, so he's here to tell us a little bit about his version of Beyond Territories, and thank you very much, Bosco.
Yeah, thank you so much, Roger. Hello, everyone. My name is Bosco. First of all, thank you, Bernard, Roger, and Stanley's invitation. Thank you for having me today. My name is Bosco, representative of HKILA in this trip. I'm a registered landscape architect in Hong Kong and UK. In order to respond to the topic, Beyond the Territory, I guess landscape should be one of the pivotal topic in today's discussion. So this is the picture where I took in Hokkaido. That is the first landscape architect, who is Isamu Noguchi. He is the first American landscape architect and the first official landscape architect in Japan. Today, I wish to speak a word for landscape architecture for design inexplicable from the history of a site, from its spatial, material, and environmental conditions, as well as from natural and social ecology as contrast with a design myriad of buildings, to regard design as a part of partial of nature to society. The contemporary theory has highlighted landscape architecture's turn to evident resemblance and signification. Can we argue this tendency has also produced its other? The landscape of contemporary practice is filled with work whose motivating stakeholders to averse to this motivation. To begin with my talk, I will introduce to 4 different topics from Institute Ambition, which is the HKIOA ambition, what we have done in the past, and goes to the urban regeneration, medical, and smart city design. And finally, I will use children play and community design as a wrap-up. In today's HKIOA, we try to explore as much as we can in this workshop, which is the transitional housing. Housing problem is always one of the crucial problems in Hong Kong. We try to figure out what is the alternative way to help our citizens and make the alternative ways of the aesthetic values for citizens to enjoy, not only purely to use the housing block itself. In this workshop, we try to explore about what is our future numbers of the transitional housing. Government planned to build about 15,000 transitional housing within 2020 to 2023. We find out that there is no such landscape scheme in transitional housing. Therefore, we have the collaborative design with the Hong Kong Council of Social Service of Playwright, YWCA, things like that. To add the modular landscape and culture, we have different types of the module by adding West, Market, Appreciate, and Play for this kind of the concept, so that the users can flexibly use the public space and hope they enjoy this gathering space as well. We, as the Hong Kong Institute of Landscape Architects, also held the World Congress, which is called the Landscape Planning Towards Climate Adaptation and the Asia Townscape Award. We have invited some expertise from local and international. So you can see the picture in the center. He's the president of SIDA, Singapore of Institute of Landscape Architect. We do have ecologists and engineer and architect have in the team. To further explore the standardization of our plants and different standards for trees, plants, and different vegetation, we established the standard specification for soft landscape materials in the Guangdong province, which is the Greater Bay of China. And we also have different collaboration in mainland international. We established this book at 2014 to 15. So imagine that you could look at the nature as being like a catalog of product. Most of my work greatly inspired by nature and site context. In this project, which is the collaboration with the lead architect ADLG, and then it is one of the urban regeneration projects were located in Kaita. I consider that LA could rediscover 3 ways to build a new world of sustainability, site context with existing habitats. It also, which is one of the big urban problem in cities, I mean, like even for the waste, can also be turned into a massive opportunity. How are we rehabilitating the river from sustainable way? This is the second project where I got involved in WKCD Park, the lead international landscape architect, West 8 Limited. To me, lively, enjoyable public spaces are the crucial elements for planning a city. For a public space to be successful for the people living in the city, the landscape architect has to give enormous dedication to the details, meaningful open space, act like they have powers. Before having the full extension of WKCD part, this is only a miniature representation part, which is a mini version of the WKCD part nowadays in Hong Kong. And the concept design start at 2014. We tried to take out the major elements from the future part and put it into this nursery. Because in WKCD part, we have to plant about 2,000 trees in order to educate our citizens what is the most important thing that we can get use of the space in the site existing. And that is the nursery part built at 2015. It's pretty great that to see most of the citizens enjoy the space very much. And there are many unexpected challenges of planning works while emphasizing that public space must never be taken for granted. Particularly, that is the first part, after a I think like 15 to 20 years that we have established WKCD district. How are we going to revive a neighborhood with imagination, beauty, and community? We wrote out this with the architect, tried to make a smart city concept basis based on the sustainability, but how do we gonna integrate those landscape together with buildings, planning, and different spaces? With the thought of reviving the use of urban communal play equipment, in some of the spaces, we tried to extend the function of the landscape, such as the healing landscape concept into the healthcare center. Talking about the smart city, that is one of the projects that I get involved in Helsinki. Again, like smart city design oriented, and we bid the job together with a team including like urban designer, architects, and I'm the only one landscape architect in this scheme. It's really interesting to see like how our clients to select a different winning entrant, things including the Italian architect firm together with Zaha Hadid and my previous company, Helsinki. Again, we focus on the sustainability and how are we going to transform those smart city devices into the extreme weather and to integrate with the nature surrounding habitats and also the future exploration of this city. With the thought of to use of this urban communal play equipment in the neighborhood as an expansion of artistic practice, in Hong Kong, we do have one design competition, which is at 2015, the Two Moon Inclusive Play Park competition. And at that time, I'm glad that I won as the champion in the professional group of this competition. At first, government and the organization didn't realize that it could be possibly be built, but after a certain extent of discussion, argument, and also exploration, we have successfully established the part together with the government department. I personally think that community landscape embracing the people by identifying a transcendental dimension to certain contemporary landscape architecture projects. The other design competition that I joined with my teammates, Vicky Ma and Nathan Cho, this is the Sensory Garden Under the Flyover in Kunton by EKEO. And our team won the first runner-up, and right now the further details have been collaborating with the relevant departments. Because when I met my foreigner friends, they always ask me the question, oh, in Hong Kong, is there any possibility to have something fun and any landscape extension? Because they thought that like in Hong Kong it's really tiny and we don't have so much space for building. It sounds impossible to have the interesting landscape space. Therefore, our team thought about to have the concept of areas in sensor land. Imagine that like you're part of the main character to enter this site. What kind of the imagination and what kind of curiosity things that you could figure out in this park. And finally, for the community landscape, I would like to share one of the build project. The project which is located in Like King Hill Room in Kwai Chung, Hong Kong. I would say that like the sharing doesn't intend to refer to idealistic imposition of predetermined and invariant forms of a range of similar objects. It's actually built this year, and then you can see that the landscape not only provide greenery space, but we also have different community pocket spaces for our tenants to enjoy the view. By integrating different design elements at the vicinity of the play area to echo the overall design theme and atmosphere of the landscape. Rather, the sharing means to invoke the virtual realm of landscape, emerge from landscape's own histories and practice. That's just all of my presentation. Once again, thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you very much, Bosco. Thank you. Our next speaker is Clara Wu. She's a Hong Kong IA member, and also she works in practice Oval Partnership. Oval, for some of us, you know, Oval Partnership is also kind of very beyond territories in some of the things they do, you know, connecting with the community and so on. And in fact, one of... very Hong Kong, very Hong Kong. Yeah, very Hong Kong indeed, the initiative. And also, they are one of our exhibitors, although not in New York, but if you see some of the VR exhibits, you will see the exhibition, which is very Hong Kong as well. It's connected to the community in Wan Chai, and I think you're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Thank you. Thank you, Clara. You want this one?
Yeah, you will see me after my book. Yeah, so just yeah. I don't want to be an architect today. I want to be a tourist today because we haven't been a tourist for 3 years, right? It feels like tourist to me in New York, and as me being a tourist this way. And I found a very peculiar points of being a tourist that I don't use Google Map in Hong Kong, right? You know the way you're at home, and this is the app that I use every day now. So every point I walk, turn left or right, I just look at my phone. And that's today what I'm going to talk about is about Google Map, one of the Google Map thing that we are working on. Beyond territories, Roger just mentioned Oval Partnership, and we are very intrigued in communities. We don't see communities as planning or designed or how the lane, the streets, or the dimensions. We want to see as a container. So what is inside the container? So it's the people, the stories, the content, the things that are inside the Google Map, the points. So our topic of the exhibitions is joining the dots. How we see the community, and we actually, because the exhibition is going through cities, so we named our exhibition in the courtesies of cultures. So in New York, we name it in English, of course, joining the dots, and in Hong Kong, is 我哋講我哋, is us telling our land, saying our own story. And the mainland for Hangzhou and Beijing, we call it 講仔講灣仔. It's a very colloquial way of speaking ourselves, of talking our own local community. So as 講仔講灣仔, what we want to talk about is we map out and we use, a look at Google Map. We look at the points in Google Map and try to map out the density. So this is the density map that we see over the corner, that we spot of the check-in places in Google Map or Instagrams, so we can locate the points inside a city where we locate. especially we are in the Oval Office, the 0.0 is us, because we have been located in one side for 25 years in the office and we never moved. So this is our own community, is where we're based. So we can't go out to the world as New York and or other cities, so we start to investigate more about our home, where places we go for lunch, and every day, that's where we are every day. So we look at Google Maps, we look at the points. So by understanding the city, the content with it, or within the place that we pass by every day, we try to understand why that road is especially busy, why Henderson Road, and why not Conant Road. So we try to look at the Google map and tells it something, tells the content. So besides the analytical data, we try also look at the people and the city. So everyone knows Leslie Zhang. Leslie Zhang actually having the bond and somewhere next to the one-time market. So everyone else, I know Snow Gang today, Gang Tou. So actually, Gang Tou is also studying primary school in Wanzai. So at the point that somehow you mentioned 6 degrees of separation, it actually happens across multi-universes. As actually people connected through the communities. As inside a jar of content as a community, we all are connected somehow in the community. So before we try to, as an overproject, we're often intrigued by the concept of sustainability community. We don't see sustainability only a green thing or planting trees or microclimates. We also want to inherit what the community has as an accent, as a spirit of the community. So if Wan Chai, what is Wan Chai? We want to look at. There are some legendary gods here. When we go to a place, we often say, we go to a house and we greet the people inside the house. We go to the temple, we worship the god. So we are in one side and we want to understand our community, and that's we drive the whole presentation. So these are the stories where we try to figure out the persons, some celebrities, some normal persons, some authors, some of the famous bakery of bakehouse, how they are linked through roles and networks and point of interest and Google Map. So we also developed an app. I was told I have to mention the website, and you could always hold up your phone and click on the QR code now, and that exactly is our exhibition, because we didn't travel through here to New York, and just by scanning this QR code and you're directed to our website of the exhibitions. Yes, I see you all doing that, so thank you. And our website is hongkongurbannarrative.com. It's how our starting our new projects to study different part of the city. Not only one time we aim to talk about more of the Hong Kong other communities. So this is our presentation. We'll see it back in Hong Kong, but we didn't come through to New York. So somehow I talk about myself as a beyond territory. We come to New York, and as already one of the territory we go beyond. And for myself, I'm not only an architect, but I'm also a calligraphist. I work for Chinese calligraphy or more commercial side. I work for, if you recognize this as a gene and tonic, I mean gene. So I work for the calligraphy, the trademark, and the bottle designed. Yeah, the gene, yeah. We can go back and try that in Hong Kong. Yeah, this is the topic that I've written for the office too. So for myself, I'm going beyond territory. So yeah, so this is what I'm going to say today. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Yeah, we'll find you when we get to Hong Kong with a gin, and yeah. Yes, you can. Although some of the exhibits didn't come to New York, but you will. If you go onto in the exhibition site, you go onto the VR booth. You can actually wander around in our exhibition venue in Beijing as well as Hangzhou, so you can see all the exhibits there. And if you're really interested, come to Hong Kong in December. For those who are not in New York, come to Hong Kong in December, and everything will be on show in December in Hong Kong as well. So the next speaker is Alex Hughes. When I first come across Alex's work and I looked at the website and I was mesmerized by some of the work beyond architecture work they were doing. I wouldn't say too much about it because Alex is going to not only talk about curve architecture, but some of the things that they do beyond just architecture. Thank you.
Thank you. I tend to speak very low, so if you can't hear me, let me know. And I talk a lot, so if I go over someone, please tell me, because I'll just go on forever. We are a New York, Manhattan-based architecture firm. We've been practicing in the city. I've been here for 20 years. The company was founded by Karim Rashid, who's a notable industrial designer, and we were looking to try to improve upon the way buildings are built by trying to source everything from the parts and pieces that go into a building from an industrial design perspective, but also trying to improve the quality of what our clients would build one way or another, and hoping to ultimately eliminate our clients and just do buildings for ourselves. That's always been our goal, and one day we may get there fully. But what we tend to do is we develop tools with the computer to try to solve problems that are recurring, whether it's a theater design, a facade design, an interior or a pattern. And what I'm going to show you is just one of our tools that we've developed, which has a lot of relationship with music. So we're very much interested in proportion. We're very much interested in human proportion and how humans relate to the spaces around them. I think everyone has seen this drawing. Everyone knows it. I think everyone in this room knows how tall they are, right? If someone asks you in meters or in inches, in imperial or in metric, you know how tall you are. But not too many people know how wide you are from tip of your finger to tip of your finger if you do this, right? And if you measure it, it's quite interesting because it's actually the same as your height. And that's what that drawing is getting at. And so there are proportions of the human body that are often studied, how a thumb relates to the fraction of your hand, or for example, this distance from your wrist to your elbow could be your foot, right? These are algorithmic proportions that are in the human body. And architects sometimes don't think too much about this. I mean, we've seen books published on the proportions of architecture and the parts of architecture in the neoclassic and in the Greeks and the ancients. There was all about proportions between the pieces. And sometimes these come from the human body, but not often they're just gone crazy on a whim on their own, right? With no relationship to our lives or our proportion. Vitruvius wrote about this, of course. Many architects have done this in the past. They've described these proportions. And we've tried to recreate them without even knowing what they mean sometimes, right? And what's even worse is when people are recreating them today to try to give a sense of status or an image of something that's no longer even understood anymore, right? So I think Le Corbusier is very interesting because he does break down the human body and the relationships and the proportions in a very algorithmic way. He realizes that the proportions of the human body and the fractions are broken down into parts and pieces that actually have functions and have relationships to the things we do as architects or interior designers, how these relationships are proportional. And he develops a very beautiful algorithm that's broken down, every part of the body in relationship to the proportion of the human body, right? And this is why I think this is fundamental in our practice, because we try to think about this as much as we can. Now, another beautiful thing is that music, which is a universal language that all humans speak, right, is also similar in proportions. And anyone who knows how to play music or studies music has seen the circle of fifths. The circle of fifths is a beautiful mechanism for trying to understand the relationship between notes, chords, their scales, and what tonics sound good and won't sound good in a given key, right? And you can use this to compose. And there's a beautiful book by a guy named Eli Maurer who studies the relationship of music and numbers. It's a really good book for people who aren't mathematicians. It explains the relationships between proportions in music and in math. And there's a lot of overlapping singularities. And he writes about Einstein meeting Schoenberg here at Carnegie Hall and the conversations they had about string theory. So string theory is very interesting because it started from an argument in the 18th century about proportions of the string, of how you subdivide a string, what frequencies you get and how they repeat. If you take a string and any stringed instrument, you go exactly in the middle of the string, you get the same note again, an octave higher. right? And if you break the string down in certain proportions, you're going to get certain musical proportions that either sound good or sound horrible. And the musicians know this, and they play with this all the time. So, you know, a harp is a great example because you can actually see how the proportions of the strings in the shape give form to the different acoustical properties. This is an amazing instrument. The koto is a Japanese traditional instrument in which all the strings are the same length and they're all the same thickness. But by moving the bridge, you can actually tune it to whatever scale you want, and the music's beautiful. But you actually need someone who has perfect hearing to tune it, right, to whatever intonation you're in. So, and you see today with the advancement of electrical instruments, you actually see that the fretboard is no longer straight. They're starting to warp them so you can play atonally in different scales. There's an engineer, I forgot his name, but first name Michael, who invented basically a Fibonacci circle that has perfect intonation, right? Because intonation, as humans, we try to do it perfectly mathematically, but it's always off a little bit for reasons I don't want to get into. And Pythagoras, right? Pythagoras, who everyone knows, the hypotenuse, a square, b square. But Pythagoras actually came up with a tuning system and rationalized music mathematically, and then generated proportions, geometric proportions from the math. And so this is from Wikipedia. This is his tuning. And if you're in any scale and you play a note, the root is a unison. It's the root note, right? And as you deviate up from, you can see D there is in the middle. As you deviate up with a perfect fourth, which will always sound beautiful, or down with a perfect fifth, which also sounds beautiful. As you go away from this, you get further and further away from the tonal scale, and things start to sound a little bit more distorted. But the beauty is this is a symmetrical pattern. If you divide it by the unison up and down, you actually find symmetry in the way music is structured. So going back to the circle of fifths, we, with a bit of inspiration from Brian Eno, who's one of our favorite experimentalists with music and generative music, this man, Robert Fripp, who has innovated with guitar and technique of getting electronic sounds into a machine. He used a double loop tape that was invented by musicians at Berkeley in the 60s, in which they're recording and the loop is adding layers and layers and layers as they play, and they end up hearing themselves play back and they play over it. So creating sort of several dimensions of music layered on top of each other, which today you can do with a looper, but back then they were doing with analog tape. It's a great album, by the way, of experimental music, highly recommended. And what you're looking at here is a guitar that has been modified with a pickup that actually picks up digital signal, a MIDI signal. And the cool thing about MIDI is it was built in the 80s for like keyboards. And it's really basic hex code. Hex code is like as simple as it gets. It's basically, they took all the keys of the piano and said there's 127 keys. Let's make a code that has 127 keys. And if you basically hit, a 56, it means you're a note, right? And you can translate that as a message to a keyboard or to another instrument to receive that data. Hex code is used for color patterns. It's a very easy way to organize color patterns. Hex code is in MIDI. This is an example of MIDI code being caught from a string instrument and then placed into a computer program, right? So we have used Python to hack the code, and I recommend Python because if you're going to learn one programming language, Python is sort of the most versatile. It's used between geologists, it's used between architects, it's used between a lot of different, and it runs on both Mac, PC, so it's very versatile. We use it to generate geometry. We use it to control the way we design in the computer in Rhino. It runs in Maya as well. It runs in ArcGIS. So we can actually hack a lot of the databases in, for example, in the New York City zoning and filter information by just having Python scripts that will run the information. In the early 2000s, with Professor Carl Chu at Columbia, we were running cellular automata programs, and we were also using it for Linden Meyer systems, which are just algorithms that generate patterns, and they generate code. But we started experimenting with topology, and again, back to proportion and human space, and how you can get forms that create space, and that you can, instead of just randomly experimenting with something that is predestined to create a form, we could actually sculpt it by using musical instruments to program a sequence that would be easy to remember. So in a sense, the forms that I'm going to show you are generated from a sequence of notes that if you know what notes you played, you can always go back, play it again, you'll get the same shape. You change one note in the scale, you get a completely different shape. But you can easily go back and say, well, what did we play? Oh, D minor scale. Okay, great. So we scripted a circle of fifths in Grasshopper with a bit of Python, started running algorithms with it, using it as a tool, and started applying it to creating form, right, and experimenting with form. Now this is a continuous form. If you go inside, you will have paths and tunnels that never intersect, they never interlap. So you could, in a sense, 3D print this and you wouldn't have any overlapping boundaries, right, because topologically it's a continuous object. So I'm going to show you, if this works, an example of a video. So this is, what we've done is we've generated the music created the form, and then once the form was done, we played it through the computer and did sort of like a short video. Let's see if this works. So we have tons more videos, and I don't want to bore you guys by just playing videos because we're short on time. But if you want to check out our website or check out our Instagram, you'll see plenty of these experiments and these videos as a result of the process. We're not musicians, we're architects playing with geometry and with music. But we do record everything we do as a documentation process of how did we create that shape? Well, it was a G major, a D minor, whatever. And so by recording that, we've been publishing the music, and sometimes we get more interest in the music we're generating than the architecture we do, which is kind of interesting. But just to wrap this up, there are a lot of applications to this. This is our practice, and what we try to do is in every project find a way to incorporate these technologies into our patterns, into the patterns behind the spatial forms we're doing. This was a retail store on Broadway, and what we did was we had an arc, and the arc was distorted into different paths, and those paths were actually guided by the scripting of the music, and to create different envelopes. And by doing that, the interstitial space between them became a place for HVAC, for lighting, for hanging extra equipment. We're doing an apartment for a Grammy award-winning artist, and it's a sort of penthouse renovation. And I asked him for his music, and he kept ignoring me, like he didn't want to give me his music. And I explained that we had a very high space that we wanted to do sort of a mural on. It was underneath the stair, it was going to be a wine cellar, and it was an opportunity to do something cool with a pattern. And finally he said, I'm taking piano lessons, and can you do Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata? I'm like, sure. So instead of me learning how to play it, I found a MIDI file of it running, and we basically ran it with a few parameters to create something that otherwise would have been a white wall, right? We're currently working on a building in Times Square. It's a simple tenement building, nothing special, but we have to upgrade the facade to make it energy efficient, and we don't have much money, but we have enough for some rain screen patterns. And after some trial, we asked the client to come up with a few compositions that they like, and they chose the Schubert piece from a horror movie that's pretty stunning in this one. We also have used this for fractals. We've applied it on Voronoi patterns, triangular patterns, hexagonal patterns, with the idea that sometimes we actually take buildings, for example. This is a modular building where we only have 4 different modules in this facade, but we tried to create some variety so that they don't repeat and they're not predictable. This is a building we're working on in the Lower East Side right now. It's on Grand Street. It's 330 Grand Street. And so just playing with the idea of 330, we took 330 hertz, which is a low E, and we did a composition in low E and started running it through the facade pattern to create some variation on the tonal pattern of the rain screen. And then as well, the facade, the way it's proportioned, it's a 1:4:5 ratio between the smallest window and the larger window. So basically, it's a composition where they're proportionate one to another with the windows. And this is going up right now, where we have a big hole down in the Lower East Side, and we're starting to build this. And this was a lobby study. Like, the client wanted a boring marble and walnut. We were trying to convince her, well, if you like marble, why don't we generate an AI pattern where we can actually create a simulation and then have it printed in porcelain tile. So instead of reaping the earth and taking, another slab of marble for your lobby, why don't we generate something that is a piece of art and a little bit less extreme to mine. So it's an AI version. This is also interior patterns created from the music sequence in the corridors. We can print in tile in different colors and different patterns, and so this is the sequence generated from that. This client wouldn't let us do anything. He had no interest in our pattern, our music. He could care less. But we did planter boxes on the front, and we had to have perforations for irrigation. So we said, we'll do it there. He won't notice. This is a project that was scripted from one circle, and from that circle we distorted it and started lofting it up to create this funnel structure. And everything in it is parametric. It's a BIM model, but it's all generated from Grasshopper without drawing a single line other than a circle. And then the aperture is basically controlled by sound vibration at the top or at the bottom, which gives the funnel shape. And lastly, this was an affordable housing project in Brooklyn that we're working on. It's 750,000 square feet of affordable housing. And it's on church land. And the church is a Southern Baptist church, so they're really, really centered around their choir. And for them, the most important space is the choir itself and the scenarium where they have their way of worship. And so trying to preserve the identity of the culture, I asked them for all their choir music, and we ran the choir music through the patterns of the facade. So you'll see it throughout the patterns of the solid parts of the facade. And we also used it to sculpt the auditorium, which you could see in this first shot, the shape of the auditorium, which is basically a loft of parallel curves that are basically being controlled by the sound wave. And the cool thing about doing projects this way is that you can get to a shape, test it, and then if you want to do a tweak, you can always go in there, change a note, see how that reacts, and you can go back and actually see what you've scripted and understand what changes you need to make quickly. This is the interior of the ceiling of the auditorium, in which the music, their choir music, has been run through in a pattern. And now we're in a process where we're trying to figure out in development how we're going to panelize this and what materials to use. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
If you haven't seen, I really strongly recommend you have a look at the videos in the website. I mean, it's mesmerizing. One thing I'm going to do, one night, I'm going to go back to the exhibition center, use that big screen, and project it on the big screen and see what that looks like. But anyway, we are so many interesting things to hear. We have to be out of here in half an hour, so let's move on. Next speaker. Everybody knows Julia. Julia is our incoming Vice President at Hong Kong Institute of Architects. So Julia is going to share with us a few thoughts on. You have a PowerPoint, so thank you.
I can cut straight to the video if you want. You can all hear me, right? Yeah. So I'm an architect by profession, obviously, and I won't show any of my projects today because it's more about paying tribute to Master Architect Ta Ho. And in the exhibition, it's the Hong Kong Art Centre that I've selected. I have a very special connection with this place. It's where I learned all the modern art about Paul Klee, Kandinsky. Even back then, AA had an exhibition at Hong Kong Art Centre. So that's where I learned and picked up a lot about modern art and other things. I'll begin. Yeah. So speaking of Beyond Territories, we collaborated with Art Centre, Hong Kong Art Centre, and pianists who played a piece of Debussy music, which you will be able to hear in a minute, because I have a trailer to show at the end. Tom Lee also was kind enough to sponsor the studio for us to record the music, and Sean M. Wong, who did the ballet for us, and the production house, who also kindly helped us to make that video possible to showcase the Hong Kong Art Centre. Coincidentally, it's a similar slide of on the right. So this is the Hong Kong Art Centre. It has actually struck many of the first endeavours back the 1970s. If you see the red little dot is where it is. It's a very small art centre. It's only about 10,000 square feet, which is about 1,000 square meter. And you see, actually outside it faces the park on an L shape. Of course, today it's all reclaimed land further on. And on this very packed 1,000 square meter, he put the gallery, the theatre. There was a chamber music hall, which is today's Louis Koo Cinema, and also a very tall experimental gallery. So these photos were taken in 1977. Yeah. You can see the layering of space. And this is the experimental gallery. So this is the first time ever that a concrete waffle slab was adopted in Hong Kong, and this is back in the 70s. So it's a very brave endeavor. So these are very old photos that we retrieved from their archive. The Verndale steel truss that you see on the facade. So Ta Ho compared this to the Chinese pagoda and the relief textured featured on the facade, which you can see a comparison between the two. And also the two red lines that you see is actually, initially he wanted to express the M&E pipes outside the building, very much like the Pompidou Center back then, because he went to Harvard graduate school. So he actually was Walter Gropier's assistant, and so he picked up a lot of the modern period conceptual philosophy, and he was bold enough to use a lot of bold colors, which was something that was quite revolutionary. This is an AC pipe down in the very center of the atrium, which was very, it was the talk of the town then, of course. It was now removed, but these are also some of the photos taken from the archive. Yeah. Yeah. So he also used very bold red theme colors for the center. This triangular stair, actually, I don't know how many of you recognize it. It's not very obvious in the art center, and it's actually the back stair, and it's at the two corners. And even the tiny yellow door handles that you see, it's now all taken off, so you can only see them in the old photos. So he also have a very special, innovative program. Back then, he proposed the artist residence and the members club at the very top of the building, which houses a library also, and it's now actually moved over to the APA. Most people don't know about it. Yeah, and they also adopted some of the modern technology then. So he actually fought for, I mean, nowadays we think this is a very simple thing, but back in the 70s, every move is a first move in Hong Kong, so it's not easy to implement them. So I will show you a 3-minute trailer. Yeah, these are the 3 logos that evolved since the 70s. And actually the center one is, I know some of you already know, is done by Q-Ze. And the idea, the meaning is think out of the box. Yeah. So I think how do you turn on the, just to, yeah. Okay, thank you. So the original clip is actually 15-minute long, yeah, and it shows more of the space, yeah. And you can see that in the virtual exhibition, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Julia. Next up, we have Phil. Phil, also former president of the RIBA USA. And Phil's career, Phil's an architect, and his career's taken him to a couple of other areas, which is way beyond territories. And I'll leave Phil to tell you all about it. Thank you, Phil. Do you want to mic here?
Yeah, I'll be okay then. Okay. In the interest of time, I'll go quite quickly. First of all, thanks very much for inviting me to be here. You are a great inspiration to me because I see so much energy pent up, waiting to make a big mark on the world, and some of you already have. And I hope that by talking about some of the things I'm going to be talking about, that it will go a little way to inspire you to think beyond the boundaries that you might think exist in having gone through a long and arduous architectural education. So, my talk is about crossing boundaries, and I thought I would start by letting you know how I got to where I am today. And it was pretty much a professional trail that started off as a child being absolutely fascinated with science fiction, space travel, physics, and astronomy. And I was also fairly good at art. Long story short, I ended up flipping a coin after A-levels, deciding to go into the field of architecture. It was either that or physics. So it came down architecture, and that's what got me into it. I ended up working in Oxford in an R&D unit, building some of the first BIM models and BIM systems that were in existence. And that same BIM model and that same BIM system was also used by the British Ordnance Survey for actually creating their first digital maps. They were one and the same. Soon after that time, the worlds of GIS and building information modeling separated quite dramatically. And we had a few years of AutoCAD, which was just basically unintelligent lines on a computer screen. I ended up going into the field of public health on a Queen Elizabeth II Silver Jubilee fellowship to Columbia. And then from there was recruited by Uncle Sam, which brought me to the United States permanently, where I was working in the office of the Surgeon General and the then Healthcare Financing Administration, doing a lot of work on medical technology work. Further on in my career, I went into the field of management consulting with A.T. Kearney and electronic data systems. We're doing an awful lot of work on health industry consulting, big data analytics, and system dynamics. And then when I was working for a subsidiary of Blue Shield of California, where I met the co-founder, actually, of Geofusion, Alex Maciejewski, he was my CIO, I kept seeing the relationship between chronic diseases that were afflicting so many millions of people in the United States and elsewhere too, and the built environments that they were living in. The relationship between disease and the swankiest suburban suburbs you could possibly imagine were where those things were concentrated. They were unwalkable, they were car dependent, and there was a problem. And that fingerprint led me eventually to where I am now with geofusion. That the spatial DNA of the places that we inhabit have a dramatic effect on who we are, our community, and how healthy we are. You all know that. You've already been talking about this quite a bit in the work that you're all doing. And so from here, I thought I would then quickly give you a view of what geofusion is and where we started. It started in the year 2000 by Alex Maciejewski and 3 other software geniuses from Silicon Graphics. And they had a dream which they were implementing on the side, so to speak, and they came up with the first digital Earth long before Google Earth even came into existence. And the difference between Google Earth and Geofusion's Earth is that it is an accurate globe pole to pole. And So as a result of that, Geofusion was directly involved with ESRI, the GIS world. It was actually built into that sphere is actually built into everything that ESRI has. We also were very consumed with the NASA Mars mission because we have a very accurate, down to very, very high resolution digital globe of Mars. We were also doing analytics, geological and gravitational analytics for Mars. So those are extreme extrusions to identify some of the major problems that we were seeing. Geofusion's globe and its algorithms and application is also used for navigation on the International Space Station. In fact, it's used for enabling the crew to actually shoot radar and laser images through cloud accurately, so they know exactly what they're looking at without having to keep orbiting until the clouds go away. We also did some of the first 3D digital cities, and also Geofusion is tracking things like earthquakes, weather conditions, and so on. In fact, during Hurricane Katrina, it was taking direct photographs from overflights of the damage, and then using the digital globe to actually direct rescue teams to the right place, so they weren't wondering where to go next. If you've ever flown on a fairly lengthy journey and there is a moving map in front of your seat where you can flip around the Earth and see things, then that software is Geofusion's. And during that time, we also built a user interface into this very complex digital globe that would enable anybody untrained, to be able to move around and see and do things with a computer. So what we thought was, we started off in outer space, but it was very important to come back down to Earth. And about a couple of years ago, Alex, my friend and co-founder here, called me and persuaded me to come join Geofusion as its CEO to help move it beyond where it had been for the past 20 years in sort of aerospace and outer space into the real problems that exist for billions of people here on Earth. And so what I thought I would do is to give you a very, this is great, how has this actually come out? That's really surprising. Well, we'll move on straight from there. It's supposed to be circular, but it's obviously not displaying correctly, and neither is this. Well, where we see Geofusion and the applications we're developing are really at the center of a vast number of concerns that relate to cities: energy security, food security, water security, and the urban form, human health. We already know the spatial DNA that is created by zoning, by planning, by building regulations, and also by financial incentives are significant drivers to the unlivability of so many places. And I'm here from Phoenix, which is the complete opposite to Hong Kong, complete opposite to New York. It is a center with sprawl. You could put all of Manhattan and the boroughs down onto Phoenix and you'd still have room to spare. It's just sprawl, but we have a population of just 4.5–5 million. So what we're going to be doing is applying our technology, which is basically the creation of visualization portals into very complex simulations and analytics. Lots and lots of different data, which is right now very hard to assemble and put together. We're moving forward to make that much easier using that very simple user interface that we developed for the aerospace industry and the moving maps. Primarily, our drive is to deliver this to cities, so we end up with 3D digital twins of cities. Well, I can show you some examples of these. And the idea is to make it possible for cities, for planners, for communities to actually see their city in a very clear 3D way, the way human beings see their city. Our view is that if we can do this and we can bring this technology to the average smartphone, we contribute significantly to the democratic process of enabling people to take control over the places they inhabit, as opposed to having the places they inhabit given to them by some big bureaucratic machinery, so they can become participants in their own place, which is very important to us. Doing this also means it means that we can enable developers to actually get their approvals a lot faster, because they can quite easily see the context within which their project is going to work. We have a few other applications that we use and have developed, which make it very easy to very quickly develop building blocks that actually sit in city blocks in the correct context of the built environment surroundings. And insurers. These kind of important guys. The value of real estate assets globally is around $310 trillion. And a lot of it is at risk for climate change and a whole range of other issues going on. The latest hurricane that came through Florida is going to be costing the insurers $58 billion. And they are starting to run out of capital in order to keep funding that insurance. So these guys have a very, very clear incentive to de-risk built environments in a very big way. So these are just some examples of visualizing urban regions using any data with a geosource. This one on the this one here is looking at energy usage and solar roofs in Southern California. The one in the middle is also about the solar potential for a region of Los Angeles. And this one at the bottom is a 3D digital twin of London. And the key thing about our buildings is that unlike OpenStreetMaps, which just takes like a footprint and extrudes it up as a block, our 3D buildings are taken from oblique satellite imagery and stereo imagery so that we can create a low polygon, which means it's very easy to manipulate, a low polygon but accurate version of that building, which is why London looks, it's gray, but it's fairly accurate. It's not just a whole bunch of blocks drawn up from the footprints. And we also have embarked on creating an urban time machine. Right now, when developers and cities look to what they should be doing in 5, 10, or 20 years, they are doing the equivalent of riding on the Big Sur highway on a motorbike at night, a moonless night with no headlights, hoping that they won't hit anything or fall off into the ocean. And what we want to do is to provide headlights that show pathways forward so that you can move, in fact, from this picture of Los Angeles on the left, utterly different to Hong Kong, utterly different to New York City, and test different scenarios for walkability, for energy usage, for air quality, for traffic volumes, and then see what types of forms get generated as a result of that. It's very similar to what Alex was talking about in terms of using music and tweak the parameters and see what comes out. We're going to be doing the same thing at the urban design scale. All of this eventually will be able to be accessible by hopefully tens of millions of people through the smallest of devices, the tablets, the PCs, through Azure or AWS, the big cloud providers, who right now don't know much about cities. They want to get into cities, so they say, which is great, but they actually need the expertise to do that, which is where architects come into this. So that's pretty much the end of what I was talking about, but I will tell you that the course of my career, which has gone from architecture into other fields, not only has it been possible, because I'm not the smartest guy in the room, I might be overdressed slightly today, but I'm certainly not the smartest guy in the room, and it's easily possible for you, because it's not that you should necessarily leave the field of architecture, but because built environments and cities have such a dramatic effect on the livability of our planet and what we do in them. We as architects, me as an original architect, but you as architects too, have a profound role to play. And I think the more you can think beyond the boundaries of what the developer tells you to do or what you think you can do as an architect, the better off this world will be, and you can make a very, very significant and very, very positive impact on the future world. And it makes me very happy to see such a bunch of young, enthusiastic faces eager to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Phil, for inspiration and encouragement. And we have 10 minutes before we will be kicked out. So we have two more speakers very quickly. We have Alvin. Yeah, Alvin, can you? You have a. The race is on. Yes. So.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Alvin. Thank you the invitation from the curatorial team, and thank you HAIA for organizing the trip to allow us to have a good dialogue here with the local practices. So I'm Alvin. What I would like to talk about it's kind of a reflection who I am and how I came through and arrived at what I am here, and to reflect what I have done in terms of how the territories being beyond or being crossed, being broken, and it's a few aspects that I look at it from a geographical point of view and the approach, how we approach architecture, architectural practices. So this is my first encountering with United States back in 2005 that I have the exchange experience at UC Berkeley, where I claimed to be majored in architecture, but I only take 2 courses in the 3 semesters on architecture. So what I did is like art practice, Spanish, space science, engineering, and so on. But I think that's the how I think of the multidisciplinary approach that I would like to put forward, and even what I am doing now. And then I had chance to work on a competition. Then I got the scholarship, and I went on study in Barcelona for 1 year. And further on, once graduated, and I got another opportunity to have experience in Denmark. So in terms of the different approaches that I came through and different conversation with different professionals from all over the group, so I learned from them, and I get adapt to different approaches to work on architectural design. And then how I challenge the senses and the art form that is related to architecture, but not exactly as architecture. Here is a primitive a way of translating music into a piece of art installation, share same with Alex. So in a sense, I think this is a representation of the music, but it also have a different senses for people that may have hearing impaired. They also have chance to appreciate a piece of music. That's how I look at it. And also is some kind of playful game that work integrated in a piece of furniture, which also can kind of perpetuate some of the traditional Chinese puzzle that also can be some kind of educating tools for kids, and for it's also a home furniture. Then it's also crossing the adding some social value and cultural value and the traditions from the as a architect's point of view. So this is the traditional vernacular stew houses in Hong Kong, because we used to be a fishing villages, and these kind of settlements is quite popular in around some of the coastal town. So this is a 3D printed metal jewelries that featuring some of the endangered architecture or buildings in the town. So we try to celebrate the details that they have. We have the sectional cut of the Wangdo Theatre, and also to the right is the Taiyo villages. So you see the bridges connecting the houses and the unique organic fabric. So in a sense, it's we use to build model is what we used to do every day or at school, but we turned it into something different. But to bring up some of the social value that we hope can have the awareness by the general public. I also work closely with some local villages on some land art back in 2017. And later on, we work with the same curator group, Hulu Culture, and I had the chance to participate in the first Yim Tin Chai Cyclone Outlying Islands. There were the art festival. And this is, in a sense, it's a collaboration that we work with the villages, with the Hakka villages, that they came to Hong Kong hundreds of years ago. And this is also a unique village that they were converted to all as Christians. I think it's one of the earliest Christian local Chinese villages back in Hong Kong. And we work all together on all those artworks and art installation for that arts festival. So we learn from each other, and I think it's interesting process. I also treasure some of the local use of material and cultures. So working closely with this master Hoi, who is a bamboo master, to create some art installations that have a contemporary approach to perpetuate the traditional aesthetics in the one of the government's buildings. So also I think that to involve in the media and to educating people or sharing the experience with the general public, I think it's allowed a much greater impacts than just a single building or a single art installation. That's why I started, even in 2010, I was involved in the HKIA's teaching tools. And I started part-time teaching as well, 2015, and I see that as a way to keep my mind refreshing and always keep aware of the trending approach and so on. And I also like going to the radio, television, share what I have been seeing, and I will keep doing it even after this New York trip for sure. Last but not least, I would like to end my showing with a short footage that was what Xuan has mentioned earlier. Is another exhibition that we curated with the team in London, which was about the crossing boundaries. It share also a bit more stances that how I look at territories, how we break it, how we go beyond it. It's in Cantonese, but I think it would be good enough because they would support it with the subtitle.
就依6個嘅互動啦，就由唔同嘅比例遞減落去嘅，即係例如由最大嘅城市邊界去到大自然建築外立面，再去到最細嘅就係個人嘅空間、個人嘅生活。
我哋希望觀眾可以透過實同埋虛兩種存在嘅狀態去理解各種香港嘅邊界。同埋香港嘅建築師同埋藝術家點樣以立同埋破兩種行為嘅取態去處理各種邊界。
咁
次其實咧，我哋就帶咗係4個啦，喺香港街道上面救翻嚟嘅招牌嚟到倫敦呢度做展覽嘅。今次展覽嘅形式就有少少特別，即係以往我哋係會係招牌作為一個展覽嘅重點啦。咁今次就將我哋4個招牌咧，就同其他4個展品係去 pair up 咁樣嘅，主要係用個招牌背後嘅故仔啦，去 highlight 另外 pair up 咗嗰個 project 所面對緊嘅邊界嘅議題。
So I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alvin. Thank you. Last speaker today, it's Javian. So Javian's also at Hong Kong. I'm a member, and she's going to share with us. Javian's now working on the other side, on the dark side, working for prop. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I am from the All Evil client side. I work at K11 Concepts Limited. For the people who aren't from Hong Kong, just a very brief sort of introduction. K11 began when our founder Adrian Chang decided that not many people in China have the opportunity to see art and design from overseas and all over the world. And so what he wanted to do was to bring all of that into China and into a shopping experience, so that we don't build more museums, because people who don't go to museums just won't go even if you have 10 of them. And so we want to try and include everything into their everyday lives. And so we redefined the traditional shopping experience, which used to be a blank canvas and just showcasing the shop tenants, to a completely immersive experience with art and design sort of embedded into the entire software and hardware. Basically. So what I do is design management in this system, and I can summarize my work in 2 words: curation and translation. So pre-opening is what you understand as the project, so a project coming from scratch all the way to when the shopping mall is built and opened, and then post-opening is everything after that. So in the pre-opening stage, my curation sort of work includes the curatorial statement. So I start by creating visions of what the project will be, or what the vision would be for an entire district, for example, Victoria Dockside. And then we choose sort of designers and collaborators who will help us create this vision. And then down to how we can strategically curate customer journeys for specific clients, so we can take most of their money through shopping. And this is done by really researching consumer and people behavior, and so how we can strategically place things, so to make them do what we want them to. And the translation comes because design is a language, and it's not universal, and not many people know how to speak it. And my job is to sort of translate all the designers' ideas and concepts to all of these people who don't know how to speak this language. So I'm telling them why they need to buy their Monets and their Picassos, and that they can't buy half a Picasso and half a Monet simply because they pay an extra arm and leg. And then in the post-opening, so when the mall is actually open, we also curate architectural exhibitions and installations and platforms for different dialogues. And in order to express ourselves better and hopefully promote architecture better to the public, we benchmark a lot of festivals from overseas, the London Festival of Architecture, October. And the reason being, it's very difficult for the public to understand people who speak the design language. For example, today is an October event, as I understand. How many people here are not from a design background? None. See, so my point proven. I think sorry, I'm rushing. I think what is important to me, and why curating and translating is important to the industry, I think, is exactly as Ben yesterday, he mentioned. We teach kids design principles so they will become better clients and stakeholders in the future. The more people who learn to speak our language, the more freedom we will have to design in the future. And it's not just about teaching people to speak our design language. It's about how, vice versa, we go about understanding the public, because these people who don't understand what we're talking about are precisely the public that we keep telling everyone we're designing for. So architecture to me is more a way of life rather than designing buildings in itself. And so it's very difficult for me to understand how we're going beyond that. But I think today what I want to put on the table is how a designer or an architect can go beyond the traditional communication approach, step beyond discussing things in our little closed group design speaking friends. And in contrary to what we learned in school, stop talking about projects in plan sections and elevations and renderings, because people not from a design background don't understand any of that, and really instead reach out and try to communicate better in a more human and a more emotional way of what we're trying to achieve for the world, and connect with the people and understand how normal, non-design based people live and feel.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Javian. Thank you very much for putting up with such a long program. We started today with K11. Jin did a project in K11, and nice symmetry. We went up to Mars and then come back to Wan Chai and then end up with talking about K11 as well, which is great. So thank you very much for that. And the very last session, we'd like to Professor Lim to come and finish off with the discussion panel with our PSP members on stage. So I'll give you this.
Yeah, I propose we do it in a very simple way. So shall we invite the panel members come up? We don't need the chairs because we can just stand, and I suggest everyone up here say a few words about what you think about whether this morning or your experience from yesterday's opening, and just we just stand here and pass the mic, 1 minute per person, and then we can go for lunch. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Nan. Yes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nan. Well, it's really a hard task to summarize such a diverse experience and all what you have shown. But it reminds me one works that one of my favorite great architects have ever said, that architecture is an art of making shelter, but about what kind of shelter and what kind of agenda you're going to hold in the shelter. So I think kind of that all architects or what we are doing are trying to use some physical form to capture some intangible value or needs. So to me, a meaningful architecture is a piece that really tells you what about is intangible part behind it. So for that reason, a successful piece of architecture is irrelevant to it is a building or whether it is a shiny one or not. And in that way, I think because it is only for a communication or record or even a dialogue. So so maybe that's why people all goes beyond boundary and see where else there is architecture.
That's very good. Yes, please come over. Let's move over. Just 1 minute. No need for a long essay.
Okay, I see that the staff is outside waiting for us to leave, so I'm cutting it short. I think that most of us on stage are the relatively younger generation of architects, sort of inexperienced, and for the last 5 or 10 minutes, we are focusing more on our own professional practice, working for the firm or on 1 or 2 projects. And I think that it is a very good experience that we are visiting another city, and through the exhibition and the sharing, the symposium, at least I'm start to step back a little bit and think about what I can do for the architecture or the community, or even go beyond the territories in the coming 5 or 10 years. So this experience is like planting a seed in my mind, and let's see what can go beyond.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a very eye-opening experience to be able to see so many it's definitely beyond boundaries, it's beyond territories, because there's so many different disciplines of people. So it makes me think that architecture is actually, we cannot limit ourselves to only speaking to the people in the profession, just like Javian has just presented. It's about how we collaborate with other people, how we can actually engage with other disciplines and not only stay within our own profession. Yeah.
Okay, hello there. I'm Humphrey as a member from HKIA, and I find this is a very inspirational event that to see our new friends in America that doing it all works in different disciplines, and also our colleagues in different works in Hong Kong is also very inspiring. And it struck me to that the beyond architecture things is all going around to back to the ground zero of the big question is like how we architects imagine imagine how we live in a place. Like when we design, we're imagining different lives in from different creative ways, like by music, by work, or by a international, or by living in Mars, a very totally different in habitat. So I think it's interesting to see how different architects how to approach how we live by different methods. So I think it's a great question to ask ourselves when we're designing, how, well, in a more creative way, how we approach when we are designing. Thank you.
For me, I think the trip is rewarding. The highlights of the trip was the visits to TT, which we had a very inspiring conversation with Dennis, and also some interesting sharings other than architecture just now. I think those are examples of how a traditional profession evolves in this era. And I think architects should not be confined to making architecture only, but instead we should really hear what other people, what the general public needs, and what we can do to help them.
Hello, I'm Peggy, and I'm not an architect, but I'm a registered town planner. And I think this is a very precious opportunity to join this tour to New York over the way and to have a collaboration with really architects and also other professionals, including landscape architects. And because in my workplace, we often to have communications with different disciplines, apart from architects, including also surveyors or even engineers. And I think from this tour, we have another aspect or perspective to look into how the built environment could improve the overall livability or the sense of place. And from the sharing this morning, including how to connect people with the local context, and also how to make use of data to maybe make better planning or analyze of the local context is quite useful. And I think planning is a continuous changing process, and we often have some fine tunes by time and by some ages. And for this inspiration from those sharing, I think we may take bets into proof for some strategic planning or master planning to see how these new technology or those new ideas could be incorporated and to make our planning to be more inclusive and for the better social needs or public aspiration.
Thank you. So thanks this panel member. Please take a seat. I have to add one more little session. For this to happen in from Hangzhou to Beijing and then come to New York and further, I would like to present to you a few colleagues who have been working extremely hard for this. And my team member, Peony, please come to the stage. Irene, Hayne, Dawn, Roger. We had really difficult times to try to go into mainland China. We had really difficult time to go from Hangzhou to Beijing. We had many difficulties to try to ship whatever we need to bring to USA, and we will face more difficulty to move back to Hong Kong. I really honor this team, They work very hard. They're very dedicated. They have to bear with a lot of the challenges. I must salute to all of them. Thank you.